Chapter 838. That's right. It's time to avenge Qingyu. Although his youngest son was more outstanding than his eldest son, Leng Qingyu was still his beloved son whom he had doted on for decades. He even died for the country and didn't disgrace the Leng family at all. Being able to avenge his beloved son in person also relieved Leng Huai of a burden. Leng Haoyu nodded. Father is right. Father will definitely avenge Big Brother with your own hands. Although the two of them didn't see eye to eye when Leng Qingyu was alive, Leng Haoyu wouldn't be jealous of his brother who died in battle. It was a good thing that his father could avenge Big Brother with his own hands. It was precisely because of this that he personally requested the prince and the princess consort to let Leng Huai continue to guard Zijing Pass for today. In the rebel camp outside Chongqing City, Hisu sat leisurely in the main seat of the commander's tent and watched the generals below arguing non-stop. In the end, they were just frightened by the news that Ren Qining had returned to the imperial court with his troops. They only had about 300,000 men under their command now, which was less than the other party's troops. Although they had won several battles under Hisu's command, once Ren Qining's million-strong army returned to the imperial court, there was no need for any military strategy. They could just use the human wave tactic to crush them. When they were almost done arguing, Hisu knocked on the table and said with a faint smile, "Everyone, is there any use in arguing about this now? We've already fought so many battles. Will the imperial court let us go if we stop now? If we fight with all our might, we might have a chance to have a prosperous future. If we surrender like this, our whole family will be executed." The generals below looked at Hisu and said with a bitter face, "Brother He, tell us honestly, does the Prince Ding mansion have reinforcements? Our brothers have worked hard for you. You can't cheat our brothers." "Yes, yes." Everyone nodded repeatedly. Hisu said with a smile, "Of course there are reinforcements, but it will take some time for them to arrive. But don't worry. Although the reinforcements haven't arrived yet, the Prince Ding mansion has already sent strong reinforcements." Everyone was startled and looked at each other before someone said, "Could it be young Master Qing Chen? I've heard that young Master Qing Chen's wisdom is unparalleled in the world, and he alone can fight against thousands of soldiers and horses. It should be Prince Ding." Prince Ding had never tasted defeat since he was 14 years old. If it was Prince Ding, why would he fear the million-strong army of the imperial court? Hisu looked at the entrance of the tent with a smile. The curtain at the entrance was pulled open from the outside. A beautiful and graceful woman in green clothes with black hair walked in from the outside. Behind her were several men in black. They were obviously guards. Everyone was shocked when they saw the Qilin pattern on the bodyguards' clothes. Qilin. The black-clothed guards did not pay attention to the shock of these people. They were scattered in every corner of the tent. Only two of them followed behind the green-clothed woman. Under the shocked gazes of everyone, the green-clothed woman walked to the main seat in the commander's tent that Hisu had vacated and sat down. She smiled faintly at everyone. "Everyone, thank you for your hard work." Seeing Hisu's respectful expression towards the green-clothed woman, a few of the more quick-witted people could not help but be moved. Someone with a more impulsive personality could not help but ask, "Who are you? How dare you sit here?" The green-clothed woman smiled faintly and said, "I am Yi Li, Princess Ding." Everyone was inexplicably shocked. "This subordinate greets the princess," Hisu said respectfully. With someone taking the lead, the others naturally followed. Everyone in the tent bowed and said in unison, "This subordinate greets Princess Ding." At least, they had heard that Prince Ding had deep feelings for Princess Ding. With Princess Ding here, the Prince Ding mansion would not watch as they were executed by the imperial court, right? Yi Li nodded and said, "Everyone, please be at ease. Please sit." Only then did everyone stand and sit down. After everyone was seated, Yi Li said, "Many thanks to everyone for being willing to help the Prince Ding mansion reclaim this place. The prince is unable to come because of the battle with the northern tribes, but this consort's words and the prince's promise are equally valid. Everyone seated here will be greatly rewarded after everything is settled." The Prince Ding mansion will not mistreat meritorious subjects. A middle-aged general who looked simple and honest stood up and said, "Princess, this subordinate does not care about the rewards." This subordinate was originally a general of the Dechu state and was forced to help the enemy attack the Chu capital. This matter. Most of the people seated here were originally surrendered generals of the Dechu state. They were not welcomed in the north and were not valued by Ren Qining. It was the Dechu state that had surrendered to the north. Now that they had betrayed the north and returned to the Prince Ding mansion, they would naturally be worried. For this middle-aged general to ask such a question, it could be seen that he was not as simple and honest as he looked. Yi Li said in a low voice, "Wherever the northern army went, they did not harm the common people. This consort can promise everyone here that as long as you sincerely pledge allegiance to the Prince Ding mansion, we will let bygones be bygones. If you are meritorious, you will still be greatly rewarded. However, if anyone has second thoughts, don't blame this consort for being merciless." "Many thanks, Princess." Everyone stood up and said. These surrendered generals were most worried about being punished after the autumn. Now that they had received Princess Ding's personal promise, they naturally could let go of this matter. For a moment, the atmosphere in the tent became much more lively. Below her, Hisu cupped his hands and said, "Reporting to Princess Consort, Ren Qining has already led an army of 1,000,000 to attack Chongqing. I wonder if we should enter Chongqing city to defend the city and wait for the reinforcements from Zijing Pass." Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "No need. Hisu, listen up. Immediately lead people out of the camp and call for battle. We must win 3 more battles before Ren Qining's army arrives and drive the enemy 30 miles away." Although Hisu did not understand why Yi Li did this, he knew that the consort had her own plans and would not speak without thinking. He stood up swiftly and said, "This subordinate obeys." After Ren Qining received Queen Helan's reply, he quickly rushed back to Chongqing city. Just as he arrived near Chongqing, he received battle reports from the front line. Even though his army outnumbered the enemy, they still lost 3 battles and were driven dozens of miles away. Only the 50,000 northern troops stationed in the capital could barely cope with the enemy and did not suffer more losses. Ren Qining also knew the character of his troops, so he had to use more than 200,000 northern troops as the vanguard and join forces with the tens of thousands of northern troops stationed in the capital to attack the rebel army. They must take back Chongqing city. Unexpectedly, this was what Yi Li and Queen Helan had planned. Not only did the army of nearly 300,000 fail to completely wipe out the rebel army after they regrouped, but the northern army even counterattacked when they saw a flag signal that the Central Plains troops did not understand at all, killing them in a disorderly manner. In an instant, what else did Ren Qining not understand? He was so angry that his eyes almost popped out and he spurted out a mouthful of hot blood. Ren Qining, who was sitting on the horse, tilted his body and fell off. If it were not for the guards beside him, even if he was not killed by the enemy, he would have been trampled to death by the chaotic army. Why? Seeing Queen Helan in bright clothes and high spirits, who appeared in front of the army, Ren Qining asked sternly. He could not believe that he was fooled by a woman who he had never taken seriously. Chapter 839. Queen Helan whipped her horse, her pretty face full of disdain. Why? Of course it's for the lives of my men in the northern region, and also to avenge my cousin and uncle. Ren Qining, who do you think you are? You want to be free and unfettered after using the people of the northern region? Since you appeared in the northern region, how many of my men have died in vain on the battlefield? Now there are less than 300,000 people left, and you want to torment them all? Do you want the northern region to be exterminated? There were more than 700,000 soldiers in the northern region, and the population of the northern region was not large. These 700,000 soldiers accounted for 90% of the young and strong men in the northern region. But now more than half of them had died. If they really let Ren Qining waste these 300,000 soldiers and horses, they would not be able to do anything. What good would it do for the northern region even if they unified the world? What awaited the northern region was only extermination. Even now, if they wanted to restore their former population and military strength, it would probably take decades of effort. Helan. Ren Qining gnashed his teeth. Queen Helan giggled, waved the whip in her hand and pointed at Ren Qining. I'm going to take my men home. If you want to hate someone, hate Princess Ding. These are all her ideas. Sound the horn, retreat. The quaint horn of the northern region sounded throughout the battlefield, and the army of the northern region gradually withdrew from the battlefield toward the northeast. In the distance, Helan looked at Ren Qining complacently with a somewhat provocative expression. Do you dare to chase? Ren Qining gritted his teeth, but more blood spilled from the corners of his tightly closed lips. But he could only watch Queen Helan leave with a laugh. Retreat, return to camp. Yes, Your Majesty. Pht. Ren Qining spat out another mouthful of blood, and finally fell to the ground, sinking into the dark sweet liquid. Ren Qining was taken back to the camp by the crowd, and only woke up after more than an hour. The generals waiting in the tent looked forward. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, how are you? Helan, you bitch. I swear to tear you into pieces. Ren Qining said with hatred. All the generals looked at each other in dismay. Many of them didn't even have time to figure out what was going on when the northern tribes suddenly attacked together in the midst of the chaos. Ren Qining gritted her teeth and said, that bitch Helan has been colluding with the Prince Ding mansion for a long time. They are waiting for I to return so that they can gather all the northern troops. This. Your Majesty, what should we do if the northern army really becomes our enemy? With Prince Ding's residents eyeing them covetously, it already made them feel extremely pressured. If the northern army turned against them. After all, no one knew better than them just how powerful the northerners were. In these 2 years, if they had not been using the northern troops as the vanguard, how could the million-strong army that they had just barely managed to recruit be able to force the Dechu state into such a state? Ren Qining sat up. These days, her heart was suppressed by many things. After spitting out a mouthful of blood on the battlefield, his mind became much clearer. She sneered and said, since Helan dares to play tricks with I, she must not be a fool. If she brings less than 300,000 soldiers into the battle between our army and the Prince Ding mansion, she won't be able to bring back a single one of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the northern tribes. In a few days, she will leave on her own. When Helan was mentioned, Ren Qining's eyes couldn't help but be filled with hatred. He relied on Helan's cousin, his ex-wife, to establish his country. He never thought that he would fall into the hands of his ex-wife's cousin, his current wife. Send someone to investigate carefully. Find out who is in charge of the Prince Ding mansion this time. To be able to use such methods, the person cooperating with the northern tribes is definitely not some random soldier. Ren Qining ordered, the original spies can't be used anymore. I'm afraid that they have already been controlled by someone. Go and rearrange the manpower. Yes. The subordinate cupped his hands in acknowledgement and turned to leave. Your Majesty, who do you think will come this time? The confidant beside the bed asked carefully. Ren Qining said coldly, there aren't many people in the Prince Ding mansion who can use such methods. Su Hongyu and Su Hongyan usually don't leave the northwest. Mo Xiaoyao is currently at war with the northern tribes. This time, if it's not Su Qingchen, then it's Yi Li. Ren Qining lowered his eyebrows and thought for a moment, then said decisively, it must be Yi Li. When we were in Glass City, she was also the one who interacted with that bitch Helan quite a bit. Ren Qining's intestines were now broken. Back then, he didn't guard against that bitch Helan at all and brought her to Glass City. He even let her reach an agreement with the Prince Ding mansion right under his nose. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets now. Your Majesty, that Queen Helan, kill. At all costs, we must not let that bitch return to the northern tribes alive. Ren Qining's expression was ferocious, and his voice was so cold that everyone in the tent couldn't help but shiver. After everyone left, the tent regained its tranquility. Ren Qining leaned against the side of the bed and closed his eyes to rest. But no one knew what he was thinking, but from time to time, the muscles on his face would twitch and his expression would distort. Mo Xiaoyao, Yi Li. You actually dared to scheme against I. I will make you wish you were dead. While Ren Qining's tent was filled with wind and rain, the Prince Ding Mansion's tent on the other side was indeed filled with laughter and singing. Although the tribal leaders of the northern tribes and the old officials of the previous dynasty couldn't wait to fight to the death. But the ordinary soldiers didn't have such deep resentment between them. When Ren Qining entered the pass, for the sake of his future rule, he didn't let the soldiers kill the innocent like the northern tribes. Naturally, he didn't have any deep hatred with the ordinary people. In these 2 years, the Central Plains soldiers had seen the northern tribes' soldiers rush to the front in every battle. They were exceptionally brave and full of admiration. Now that these northern tribes' soldiers had rebelled against Ren Qining, everyone could be considered to be on the same side. Naturally, there was nothing much to say. In the entire camp, except for the soldiers who were on routine patrol, everyone, regardless of whether they were from the Central Plains or the northern tribes, sat together to drink and eat meat. The singing and dancing were even livelier than when they had won a battle. The people of the northern tribes had no intention of participating in the Central Plains War and were eager to go home. Tonight could be considered as a farewell banquet hosted by Yi Li and the Prince Ding Mansion for the people of the northern tribes. In the open-air camp, Yi Li led the people of the Prince Ding Mansion and the Central Plains generals of the recently recovered northern tribes to sit side by side with Queen Helan's father, the current leader of the northern tribes. They drank good wine together. The people of the northern region saw that although this seemingly weak Prince Ding's residence was not very good at drinking, his actions were very clean and efficient. He was not like those people under Ren Qining who hid a knife behind a smile and had a stomach full of cunning plots. They also heard that it was all thanks to Princess Ding that so many northern tribes soldiers could safely withdraw from the battlefield. They couldn't help but have a very good impression of this princess of the Central Plains. The only women present were Queen Helan and Yi Li. Queen Helan didn't sit on her own side but went to Yi Li's side to join in the fun. Now, seeing that the people of the northern tribes were about to go home, Queen Helan's pretty face also showed some playfulness and relaxation. At that time, she would be even more relaxed than before, truly like a 16 or 17-year-old carefree girl. She was not a queen of the northern tribes who had to pretend to be arrogant while shouldering the rise and fall of the whole tribe. Chapter 840. Princess Ding, this time we were able to safely withdraw from the pass and return to our homeland, thank you very much. Come. Helan toasts to you. Queen Helan raised a wine bowl and smiled at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and picked up the wine cup. She smiled and said, I can't hold my liquor, so I'll drink this cup. Cheers. She raised her head and drank the wine in the cup in one gulp. The most ordinary strong wine, once in the stomach, did indeed have a hot feeling. Yi Li's jade-like beautiful face was also stained with a trace of red. Queen Helan shrugged and also drank it in one gulp. She smiled and said, You are very straightforward, very much to the taste of our northern region people. It's just that your alcohol tolerance is too low. Queen Helan. Yi Li smiled helplessly. Her alcohol tolerance was not bad among women. But compared with Queen Helan, a woman of the northern region who had been drinking strong wine since childhood, it was really not enough. Queen Helan glared at her unhappily. I'm not a queen anymore. Who wants to be a bullshit queen? This girl will be the greatest female chief of the northern region in the future. Although the northern region was a barbarian land, it did not value the difference between men and women, let alone the preference for men over women. From ancient times to the present, there had been several female chiefs in every tribe, and they were not worse than men. Queen Helan's father, who was the current leader of the northern region, only had one daughter, Helan. This time, she had made such a great contribution to the tribe, so she was naturally the next chief. Yi Li smiled and said, Okay, it's my fault. Princess Helan. Helan pouted and stared at Yi Li for a long time before nodding with satisfaction. That's more like it. After saying that, she turned and pulled Hisu, Qin Feng, and the others, who were sitting below Yi Li, to drink. Obviously, they were also drunk. On the other side, not far from Yi Li, Helan's father obviously heard his daughter's words. He raised his wine bowl helplessly to Yili and said with a smile, Helan has been spoiled by me. Princess, please forgive me. It's fine. Princess Helan is intelligent and bright. Patriarch is very fortunate. Although Yili had only met the temporary chief of the northern tribe a few times, she knew that he was no ordinary barbarian since he was able to raise a daughter like Helan. Ren Qining's biggest mistake was that he had underestimated the barbarians of the northern region. The people of the northern region were able to help him establish his country, so naturally, they could also make him suffer a crushing defeat. The patriarch doted on his daughter, Yu Helan, and was naturally very happy to hear Yili praise her. He threw his head back and laughed, then drank several bowls of wine. All the men in the army were silent for a long time. Seeing that the chief of the northern region was so forthright, everyone present began to clamor, and the atmosphere in the camp became more lively. Princess Ding, I've long heard that the Mahist army is brave and good at fighting. Every one of them has extraordinary skills. We'd like to compare notes with our brothers from the Mahist army. Princess Ding, please allow it. A young man among the generals of the northern region stood up and said loudly. Hearing this, everyone's eyes lit up. The Mahist army had been known as brave and good at fighting for 200 years, and it could be said that they had rarely been defeated. Perhaps the Mahist army wasn't the bravest army in the world, but it was definitely the army that had experienced the longest and was still as brave as ever. Many of the famous warriors in history had been brave and extraordinary in their early days, but after a period of prosperity, many of them gradually became second-rate because their superiors were content with pleasure or for some other reason. But for the Mahist army to still be able to look down on other countries for 200 years and still be able to sweep through the world after being suppressed by successive rulers of the Dechu state, this was unheard of. The men of the northern region were fond of fighting, and now that there was a general from the Mahist army nearby, they naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity to compare notes. Yili was in a difficult position. Of the people present in the Prince Ding mansion, only Qin Feng and He Su had led troops before. But no matter who it was, it wouldn't be fair for either of them to fight with the people of the northern region. If they weren't born as shadow guards, if they weren't from the Black Cloud Cavalry, and if they weren't from Qilin's demonic training. In terms of individual strength, they could definitely kill any of the northern region's generals. Hearing that there was going to be a fight, Princess Helan's eyes immediately lit up. She ran in front of Yili and said with a smile, Princess Ding, why don't you agree with them? I also want to see how strong your Prince Ding mansion's generals are. Yili looked at her with a helpless smile. Princess Helan didn't care, pulling out the soft whip at her waist and pointing it at He Su, you're a general from the Mahist army, aren't you? This princess wants to experience your skills. He Su stared blankly. The people of the Prince Ding mansion all had a strange habit. Because of their relationship with Yili, they never looked down on women, but they also felt that there was no other woman in the world who could be compared to Yili. If he fought with this Princess Helan, no matter who won or lost, he would be laughed at by those heartless people when he returned. Princess Helan, this, Princess Helan raised her chin and said, what is this? This lady is openly challenging you. Are you looking down on this lady? He Su glanced at Yili sitting at the head of the table, only to see her calm expression as if she didn't see his pleading eyes. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that the princess had no intention of helping him out. On the side, Zhuojing, Lin Han, Qin Feng, and the others all looked at her with pleading eyes. This princess of the northern region was not to be trifled with. If he won, he would be bullying a woman, but if he lost, he would be worse than a woman. In that case, princess, please. He Su stood up and cupped his hands. Chapter 841. Since he had agreed to Princess Helan's challenge, He Su did not beat around the bush. He stood up and walked to the open space in the center. Princess Helan was very happy to see that he was straightforward and followed him. He Su cupped his hands and said, Princess, don't go too far. Princess Helan replied with a fierce whip. You people from the Central Plains talk too much nonsense. The long soft whip mercilessly lashed at Hisu. Hisu was born in the Shadow Guard. As the head of the 4 Shadow Guards by Yi Li's side and the first batch of people personally trained by Yi Li, he also had nearly 10 years of military career. If Princess Helan picked him, Hisu would not need to lead troops to war and could just take off his armor and return home. Hisu did not even use his weapon. He casually sidestepped and dodged Princess Helan's seemingly fierce attack. Princess Helan was a little surprised. Although she was not arrogant enough to think that she could defeat Yi Li's capable general, she did not expect the other party to dodge her whip without even moving. She snorted and said with a smile, "You're really powerful. Again. Let's see how you dodge this." Princess Helan stopped probing and the long whip in her hand rolled toward Hisu like a sky full of poisonous snakes. Hisu took a step back and dodged Princess Helan's whip with his bare hands. The two of them began to exchange blows in the open space in the field. In the blink of an eye, they had already exchanged 50 to 60 moves. Hisu felt that he should give enough face to this princess. With a snort, he directly ignored the shadow of Princess Helan's whip and firmly grabbed the end of the long whip. With a slight shake, Princess Helan's whip fell out of her hand and was put away by Hisu. Everyone present cheered in unison. Hisu put away the long whip and walked up to Princess Helan, saying, "Thank you for letting me win, Princess's whip." Princess Helan looked at him from head to toe. The general of the Mahist army is indeed powerful. I, Helan, am convinced. She took the whip and no longer pestered him. She returned to sit beside Yi Li. The northern generals watching the battle could naturally see that Hisu was holding back. On one hand, they admired Hisu's kung fu, and on the other hand, they were even more eager to fight. The young man who had asked Yi Li for help was the first to stand up and challenge Hisu. It was inconvenient to fight with a woman, but it was a different story when fighting with a man. Hisu also very straightforwardly accepted his challenge. The two men began to shout in the open space of the field. Although the people of the northern region generally did not practice internal energy, their external energy and physical strength were far beyond that of the people of the Central Plains. Hisu's interest was also piqued. He decided not to use his internal energy and only use some of the most commonly used martial arts in the army to fight with him. The intensity of the fight between the two men was naturally incomparable to the fight with Princess Helan just now. Their punches and kicks made the blood of the people around them boil, and there was a lot of noise. Hisu fought 5 or 6 men of the northern region in a row without showing any signs of weakness. After that, Qin Feng, Lin Han, Zhuo Jing, and the others also entered the field. Their martial arts were not inferior to Hisu's at all. Not only did the northern generals admire them greatly. The Central Plains generals who had surrendered on their side were also very shocked. Even these unknown young generals under Princess Ding were so powerful. How awe-inspiring were those famous generals who had been famous for a long time. They could not help but rejoice in their hearts that they had surrendered to the Prince Ding mansion early. With such strength, how could Ren Qining not be defeated? It had to be said that this was actually a beautiful misunderstanding. Among these 4 people, except for Hisu, their ability to lead troops and fight was probably not much better than the generals present. However, their martial arts could definitely be ranked in the top 10 of the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army. Early in the morning, 50 miles northeast of Chongqing City, 300,000 soldiers of the northern region had already headed north under the leadership of the tribal leaders of the northern region. They would come out from there and return to their own familiar land. Counting from the time Ren Qining appeared on the land of the northern region had undergone too many changes in the past decade. They had also been blinded by desire and ambition. Following Ren Qining, they wanted to build a huge empire and build a great undertaking that would last forever. They wanted all the rich land in the world to become the hunting ground for the men of the northern region. However, they had also paid a huge price. In just over a decade, from the previous tribal war to the war at the pass and the 2 confrontations with the Mahist army, the population of the northern region had decreased by 60% compared to a decade ago. The number of young men had also decreased by more than 80%. If they continued to be stubborn, what awaited them was only extinction. Therefore, they now brought the remaining men back to the place they were familiar with and started a stable life again. Perhaps in another decade or so, the population of the northern region would still be as prosperous as before. Princess Ding, we are leaving. Thank you for this time. I, the northern region, will never forget the great kindness of the Prince Ding mansion. Princess Helan stood on the side of the official road with a horse and said with a sincere smile. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, Princess, take care. There is still a war in the rear. Forgive me for not being able to see you off. Princess Helan smiled and said, no need to see me off. Your Central Plains is very fun. When the war is over, I will come and play with you. Yi Li smiled and said, I will be waiting for you at any time. Princess Helan mounted the horse and cupped her hands towards Yi Li and said, I am leaving. By the way, Princess Ding. That Ren Qining is very vengeful and ruthless. After I leave, he will definitely vent his anger on you. You must be careful. Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, I know. Princess, take care. Princess Helan nodded and turned her horse to chase after the large group in front of her. She heard a sharp whoosh in the distance. Princess Helan turned her head and saw a feather arrow with a cold glint shooting towards her. Princess, be careful. Yi Li shouted. At the same time, she moved her sleeve and a silver light flew out from her sleeve and shot towards the arrow. At the same time, Zhuo Jing and Lin Han, who were beside Yi Li, jumped up and slashed at the arrow with their swords. Finally, the arrow was shot down before it could reach Princess Helan. Princess Helan was not injured, but the horse under her was startled. It neighed and raised its front leg to throw Princess Helan off the horse. On the other side, Qin Feng flew forward and pulled Princess Helan down from the horse's back. He then slapped the horse's body. The majestic horse immediately fell to the ground, but it did not die. It just lay on the ground and shook its head uneasily. Princess Helan was still in shock after being pulled down by Qin Feng. She could not help but exclaim, what's going on? Bitch, give me your life. Before Yi Li could return to Princess Helan, countless men in black had already surrounded them. Yi Li glanced at them indifferently and said, it's Ren Qining's men. Princess Helan was furious. Her hatred and anger towards Ren Qining were no less than Ren Qining's towards her. She had originally planned to trap Ren Qining once and forget about it. In any case, the Prince Ding mansion would take care of him. She did not have to do anything more and lost the lives of the northern soldiers for no reason. She did not expect that Ren Qining would dare to send people to assassinate her. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Princess Helan did not use the whip anymore. She pulled out the dagger at her waist and rushed towards the assassins with a few guards beside her. Yi Li said to Qin Feng, don't let anyone hurt Princess Helan. Chapter 842. Qin Feng nodded. With a wave of his hand, the guards of the Prince Ding mansion also rushed forward. The melee between the two sides was not much gentler than a small battle. Ren Qining, I know you're here. Come out. Princess Helan slashed at an assassin in black and shouted loudly in all directions. A cold voice rang out not far away. I'll fulfill your wish. Ren Qining jumped down from a small hill by the roadside. The long sword in his hand was like a snake as he stared at Princess Helan and shot straight at her. He Su and Qin Feng flew forward at the same time. Their two long swords struck Ren Qining's sword at the same time, blocking Ren Qining. Behind him, Lin Han had already pulled Princess Helan to Yi Li's side. Ren Qining glanced at He Su and Qin Feng in front of him, then looked at Lin Han and Zhuo Jing who were guarding Yi Li. He knew that if he didn't deal with these people today, he wouldn't be able to touch a single hair on Princess Helan's head. Without saying anything else, he waved his long sword and charged straight at Qin Feng. Even if Ren Qining's martial arts were not the best in the world, he was still one of the best. Back then, Ling Taihan and Lei Zhenting had personally said that Ren Qining must be one of the top 10 masters in the world. Although Hisu and Qin Feng's martial arts cultivation were still a little inferior to Ren Qining's, the Prince Ding mansion, especially Qi Lin, was best at fighting together. Back then, a few fledgling Qi Lin had been able to capture Mu Qingcang, one of the top 4 masters in the world. Now that Hisu and Qin Feng had joined forces, Ren Qining wouldn't be able to escape for a while. Ren Qining's fight with Hisu and Qin Feng lasted for more than half a shichen. Yili looked at Qin Feng and Hisu, who were gradually falling behind. She also praised Ren Qining in her heart. No matter what kind of person Ren Qining was, at least his martial arts were really good. At least he was much stronger than Tan Jiji. Young Master Ren, there won't be any results even if we continue fighting like this. Why don't you listen to this consort and let everyone stop? Yili raised her voice. Ren Qining sneered, and his attacks became even fiercer. Yili narrowed her eyes slightly. Young Master Ren, this consort has never been a gentleman. This consort is particular about the rule of not bullying with numbers. The implication was that if Ren Qining insisted on fighting, she didn't care about bullying with numbers. Ren Qining only had a slight advantage over Hisu and Qin Feng. If Qin Feng and Hisu really fought with their lives on the line, Ren Qining might not be able to escape unscathed. If Zhuo Jing and Lin Han were to join in, Ren Qining would definitely lose. After a moment, Ren Qining finally snorted coldly and retreated with a sullen face. The remaining assassins also finally stopped and stood behind Ren Qining. Looking at the sullen man opposite her, Yili smiled faintly and stepped forward. Young Master Ren, I didn't expect to see you again so soon after we parted in Glass City. Hearing this, Ren Qining's expression became even more unsightly. He glanced gloomily at Yili and the others. He pointed his sword at Princess Helan and said, "Hand that slut over. The matter between I and the Prince Ding mansion will be decided on the battlefield." Yili shook her head regretfully. Princess Helan is a friend of the Prince Ding mansion. At least before she leaves the border, the Prince Ding mansion cannot let anyone touch her. If young Master Ren must kill her, you can wait until she returns to the north. At that time, I won't be able to do anything and won't be troubled, right? Ren Qining sneered and stared at Yili. Princess Ding means that you must protect this slut? Yili sighed helplessly. I have no choice. Young Master, please forgive me. Do you think that I only have these people with me? Ren Qining said gloomily. I must tear this slut into pieces. Enough, surnamed Ren. Princess Helan couldn't endure being scolded by such a slut like Ren Qining. She stepped forward and stood beside Yili. She glared at Ren Qining and said, "Is there anyone more slutty than you in this world? My cousin saved your life, so my uncle married my cousin to you. But you pretended to be pitiful and deceived them. You even killed my cousin. You used the men of the north to fight for you and help you build your country. You turned your back on us and have sinister intentions. You even want to exterminate the north. In the words of you Central Plains people, people like you should be called scum. Trash. Despicable. The hundreds of thousands of heroic spirits of the north who died in vain will not let you go. I curse you to die alone in this life and the next. A lowly person like you still wants to revive your country? Dream on." Yili couldn't help but cover her mouth and hold back the laughter in her heart. Helan's Central Plains language was ordinary, but when it came to scolding people, even 3 Central Plains people couldn't compare to her. Just by looking at Ren Qining's face, which was green, blue, and purple, one could see how wonderful her scolding was. Yili coughed softly and said to Princess Helan, "All right, Helan. This place was not a place to fight, not to mention that everyone was so close to each other. If Ren Qining really went crazy with anger, it wouldn't be good if he hurt anyone." Princess Helan still wanted to continue, but for the sake of Yili, she resentfully shut her mouth. Seeing that Ren Qining had calmed down, Yili said, "Young Master Ren, I have no right to intervene in the grievances between you and the north, and I can't say who is right and who is wrong. This consort only wants to ask young Master, will killing Princess Helan have any effect on the situation?" Ren Qining was stunned. At this point, the North's army had already left. Whether he killed Helan or not, it would have no effect on the situation. At most, it would help him vent his anger or give the Prince Ding mansion a slap in the face. But if Yi Li refused to back down, how much would he have to pay to take Helan's life? Looking back at the hundreds of assassins he brought, only a few were left. Ren Qining's eyes dimmed. Yi Li continued, I know that young Master Ren still has an ambush. But young Master Ren should know that I can't just come here with a few guards. To be honest, Princess Helan's life or death has no effect on the Prince Ding mansion, but if young Master Ren insists on making a move, I can only accompany you. The Prince Ding mansion promised to send the people of the North away safely, and they definitely won't go back on their word. Ren Qining was silent for a moment, looked at Yi Li, and sneered, Princess, aren't you afraid of raising a tiger and inviting calamity if you let them leave now? I was able to persuade them back then, could it be that they were really deceived by I? If they didn't have their own ambitions, how could they be persuaded by I? Yi Li said calmly, no one can guarantee that there will always be peace and prosperity. At least at this moment, the North doesn't have the heart to fight for the Central Plains. If it weren't for young Master Ren, they would still be fishing and hunting in the White Mountains and Black Waters, and have nothing to do with the Central Plains. I can't exterminate the North for the so-called future, can I? If the Central Plains is always strong and powerful, the foreign races naturally won't dare to have the slightest disrespect. If they are willing to degenerate, even if the North is exterminated today, how can young Master Ren guarantee that there won't be a western or eastern region tomorrow? Ren Qining snorted, knowing that he couldn't persuade Yi Li to back down. A woman like Yi Li had her own conclusions long ago, and it was indeed difficult to persuade others. Ren Qining shot an arrow at Princess Helan, you'd better not take a single step in the North for the rest of your life, or I will exhaust my whole life to make you die without a complete corpse. Chapter 843. Princess Helan was not afraid at all and replied with a sneer, this lady will pray to the great god day and night to let you die early and reincarnate. Seeing that Ren Qining had compromised, Yi Li did not say anything more. She instructed Qin Feng, send someone to escort Princess Helan to catch up with the group in front. Also send the princess out of seclusion. Qin Feng nodded silently, Princess, please. Princess Helan knew that Yi Li was worried that Ren Qining would secretly play tricks, so she let her go first. She made a face at Yi Li, waved her hand, and mounted a horse led by a guard behind her. She led her people and rode away. Princess Ding. See you later. After Princess Helan left, only Yi Li and Ren Qining were left on the side of the road. The two sides were confronting each other. Ren Qining had been angry for the past 2 days, but when he was really angry and faced Yi Li again, he forced himself to calm down. Looking at Yi Li's beautiful face, he sneered, Princess Ding, good move. Yi Li raised her hand and brushed the hair on her cheek. She smiled faintly and said, young Master Ren, you flatter me. I just happened to be here. The veins on Ren Qining's forehead bulged, and his eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. In Ren Qining's ears, Yi Li's words clearly sounded like she was mocking him for being incompetent, which gave her the opportunity to plot against him. He took a deep breath and suppressed the monstrous anger in his heart. Ren Qining glanced at the people around Yi Li and sneered. She sneered and said, everyone says that Prince Ding and Princess Ding are inseparable, but why didn't I see Prince Ding fighting this time? Could it be that he looks down on I and disdains to show himself? Young Master Ren, why do you ask when you already know the answer? Our prince is now fighting with the northern tribes. Naturally, he is not here. Yi Li said, besides, although Prince and I are husband and wife, we are not the same person. How can there not be a time when we are separated? Ren Qining stared at Yi Li, and his smile became more sinister. I have long heard that Princess Consort is also a god of war. It seems that this time, I will not have the chance to experience the tactics of the war god of the Chu state. I will not have lived in vain to experience Princess Consort's military tactics. But, if Princess Consort is lost again? I want to see if Prince Ding will have the chance to kill my entire family. When he said the last sentence, Qining's words, there was a bloodthirst. In the past 2 years, the conflict between the tribes of the northern region and the old officials of the Central Plains had intensified. It started when Mo Xiaoyao sent people to assassinate the queen and the princes of the northern Jin kingdom. It could be said that Ren Qining's defeat today was also the root of the disaster at that time. Perhaps he did not understand at the start, but after thinking about it, even someone as unscrupulous as Ren Qining could not help but tremble with fear at Mo Xiaoyao's schemes and calculations. Yili pursed her lips and smiled, how can I let you sacrifice the lives of your entire family? I will take care of myself, and I hope you will too. I hope so. Ren Qining sneered. Goodbye. At this time, both sides could be said to have revealed their true intentions, so there was no need to be polite. I won't see you out. Ren Qining said. Ren Qining watched Yili and the rest leave calmly. He stood by the ancient road with his hands behind his back, and no one knew what he was thinking. Seeing him like this, the assassins standing behind him did not dare to disturb him. After a long while, a subordinate who could not wait any longer came to find him. Seeing Ren Qining standing there in a daze, he hurried forward to greet him, Your Majesty, the Northern Army and, gone. Ren Qining said coldly. Should I go and chase them back immediately? There's no need. Ren Qining shook his head and turned to walk back. He said in a low voice, let's go back. We're about to prepare for the battle. In at most 3 to 5 days, Lin Huai's troops at Bauhinia Pass will definitely arrive. The general following behind him was shocked. If that is the case, won't we be pincered by the Mahist army? Your Majesty, shouldn't we retreat first? Ren Qining looked back and asked calmly, where should we retreat to? Behind us is Bauhinia Pass. If we go north, even if we break through Yili's blockade, do you think the Northern Army will bite back at us at this time? The general behind him could not help but change expression. After thinking for a bit, he broke out in a cold sweat, Your Majesty, then what should we do? What should we do? Ren Qining walked at the front, his footsteps steady. But no one saw the trace of confusion that flashed across his face. I also want to know what to do. The area outside Bauhinia Pass had been vast and sparsely populated since ancient times. There were not even many decent cities. In this kind of place, there was no need to pay attention to the art of war or the terrain when fighting. The terrain was flat, and all the soldiers and horses had nowhere to hide in broad daylight. But no matter how weak Ren Qining's troops were, they still had millions of troops. As the saying goes, enough ants can bite an elephant to death. Lin Huai's Mahist army of more than 200,000 and Yili's troops that surrendered only had about 500,000. For a time, the two armies were in a deadlock outside Bauhinia Pass. A few days later, the Mahist army sent out an edict personally written by Princess Ding, saying that the people were innocent. The Mahist army in the north was fighting with the barbarians in the north, and they were unwilling to act rashly against their own people. As long as the soldiers of the Northern Army were willing to surrender, everything would be forgotten. If they were still willing to join the army, they could join the Mahist army. If they were not willing, they could disarm and return to their fields. On the other hand, the news that Ren Qining was not an orphan of the previous dynasty came out of nowhere. There were also a few old officials under Ren Qining who personally testified. Hence, not only were the ordinary soldiers in the lower ranks divided, but even the generals under Ren Qining who were originally trusted started to waver in their hearts. In the Northern Army camp, there were soldiers escaping every day. What's more, he directly surrendered to the enemy on the battlefield. No matter how severe Qining's punishment was, it was still not enough. On the 15th of August, the two armies once again faced off 10 miles outside Chongqing City. Lin Huai, who originally split into two groups, also led his troops to meet up with Yili and Hisu. Ren Qining, who originally had millions of troops, was now left with less than 200,000 troops. Their morale was low, and their appearance was disorderly. They could not be compared to the Mahist army behind Yili and the others who were all dressed in black. Everyone knew that today was the last battle. Ren Qining was wearing a bright yellow dragon robe, riding on a chestnut horse. He looked coldly at Yi Li and the others on the opposite side. He seemed to be losing but not losing. After a moment of silence, Ren Qining pulled out his sword and pointed at Yi Li. He said in a deep voice, "Princess Ding, I's defeat today was not because of the war, but because the heavens failed me. If it was only about marching and fighting, there was really nothing to say these days." Originally, Ren Qining with millions of troops should not have been defeated so quickly. Unfortunately, Ren Qining did not have any advantage at all. How could he not be defeated? How could he be convinced if he was defeated? Before Yi Li could speak, Leng Haoyu, who was following behind him, sneered, "The heavens help those who achieve Tao. If you don't fail the heavens, how will the heavens fail you?" Ren Qining's face sank, and he did not say anything more. "In that case, Princess Ding, can we fight?" Leng Huai, who was on the right side of Yi Li, patted his horse and said coldly, "There is no need for the princess to fight. I want to see the Northern Region King's martial arts." Chapter 844. Ren Qining smiled disdainfully and said, "Old General Leng, you're old. Why don't you retire at home? I don't want to bully you because you're old and weak." Leng Huai was so angry that his face turned green. With a roar, he raised his sword and rushed towards Ren Qining. Seeing him like this, Ren Qining didn't hold back. He waved his sword and slashed back. Everyone watched Leng Huai and Ren Qining fight and didn't go forward to help. However, Leng Haoyu frowned slightly as he stared at the two people fighting. The long sword in his hand had already been unsheathed. Yi Li sighed in a low voice, "Old General Leng is no match for Ren Qining. Leng Er, go and help." Although Ren Qining's martial arts were brilliant, he couldn't do anything if Qin Feng and the others swarmed him. Yi Li had never liked the monotonous one-on-one practice before fighting. However, Leng Huai had a grudge against Ren Qining for his son's death. Leng Huai was no longer young. Previously, he had forced himself to guard Zijing Pass and the Chu capital for a few months, so his vitality was greatly damaged. He still refused to rest and led the troops to guard the Purple Thorn Pass in order to avenge his beloved son. Yi Li naturally couldn't disappoint Leng Huai. Leng Haoyu had been worried about Leng Huai's safety for a long time. As soon as Yi Li spoke, he immediately rushed over. With a swing of his sword, he blocked Ren Qining's sword that was stabbing towards Leng Huai. Ren Qining sneered, "One died, but there's still a good son." Without another word, 3 consecutive swords came towards Leng Huai. Leng Haoyu's long sword danced out a sword net, blocking Ren Qining's sword. Qin Feng whispered beside Yi Li, "Princess, Leng Er and General Leng are no match for Ren Qining." Ren Qining's martial arts were not only among the top 10 in the world, but at least among the top 5. Compared to Ling Taihan and Lei Jinting, he only lacked time and experience. As for a natural-born freak like Mo Xiaoyao, he naturally couldn't compare. However, Leng Haoyu's martial arts could only be considered good. Compared to a general like Leng Huai, it was unknown how much stronger he was. Yi Li said indifferently, "Don't worry about them. Do it. We must end this battle today." Suddenly, the sound of war drums could be heard on the battlefield. The Mahist army behind Yi Li roared in unison as they charged towards the army of the northern region. Over the past few days, the northern region army had either fled or surrendered. Only these few people were left, and they were already frightened out of their wits. When they saw the Mahist army charging over like a black tide, they were on the verge of collapsing. In the chaos, Ren Qining, Leng Huai and Leng Haoyu gradually moved to a place with fewer people. In the end, it was Ren Qining who impatiently swept Leng Huai to the ground with his sword. He was seriously injured. "Father!" Leng Haoyu's expression changed. He swung his sword at Ren Qining a few times. Behind him, Yi Li, Qin Feng and the others also followed. Qin Feng saw that Leng Huai was seriously injured and Leng Haoyu was also injured. Without saying a word, he directly drew his sword and stood up straight. Behind him, Zhuo also joined the battle. Yi Li then called people to send Leng Huai away to treat his injuries. Ren Qining had been fighting hard for days. At this time, he was facing Ling Haoyu, Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing at the same time. Gradually, he began to show a trace of exhaustion. Qin Feng saw a flaw and mercilessly stabbed his sword diagonally across his chest. Ren Qining's face turned pale, and a trace of scarlet overflowed from the corner of his mouth. With a swing of his sword, he pushed the three people away and leaped forward. Seeing that he was about to escape, everyone hurriedly chased after him. Outside Chongqing City, by a quiet lake, Ren Qining, dressed in a bright yellow dragon robe, sat quietly, looking at the small city standing not far away. He had been busy for half of his life and used all kinds of methods to repay his kindness. What he got was only that small city and the incomplete half of the palace. So tired, Qi Lin had never failed when he made a move. Qin Feng's sword seemed to have missed, but in fact, it was just that he wouldn't die for a while. It was just a little better than dying immediately. Ren Qining tapped a few acupoints, but the blood was still flowing out of the wound. He simply didn't bother to care about it. He casually inserted his sword into the ground beside him, sat alone by the lake, and let out a long sigh of relief. After a while, Yi Li and the others followed. Seeing the figure by the lake, Yi Li raised her hand to stop everyone and walked forward alone. Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing exchanged glances. They each took a position and stared vigilantly at the bright yellow figure. Hearing the footsteps behind him, Ren Qining turned around and saw Yi Li. He smiled faintly and said, "You're here. If you didn't come, I might not have been able to wait for you." Yi Li looked down and saw that the ground under him was stained red with blood. His face was as pale as paper, and he didn't have the vigor he had when he fought with the people on the battlefield. "Northern Region King, do you have something to say?" Yi Li asked with a lowered eyebrow. Ren Qining waved his hand indifferently and said, "You can call me Ren Qining. It's a name that has been with me my whole life. I'm too lazy to change it." Before he died, he didn't care about the title of Northern Region King or Lin Yuan's identity. In fact, only the name Ren Qining had been with him his whole life. The other two names were probably just what he wanted. Yi Li changed her words and said, "Young Master Ren, do you have something to say?" Ren Qining said faintly, "I don't have anything to say. It's just that I'm about to die. I don't want to die alone. It's a pity that I can't fight with Princess." Yi Li said, "I'm afraid that my insignificant skills won't be able to enter young Master Ren's eyes." Ren Qining looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "Actually, I seriously thought about whether I should risk my life to kill you. Whenever I think about Imo Xiaoyao's expression when he hears about your death, I feel very happy." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, "If that's the case, why didn't young Master Ren do it before?" Ren Qining shook his head and sighed, "I don't have the confidence to kill you. Moreover, thinking about it now, it's very boring. Even if Imo Xiaoyao is heartbroken, it won't do me any good. Although many people think that I've done so many things, it's very funny. But I always feel that Princess won't laugh at me. There's nothing funny about people who work hard for their beliefs, even if their beliefs are wrong in the eyes of the world. Moreover, who can understand what's right and wrong in this world?" Yi Li said lightly. "Well said." Ren Qining smiled and said, "So, it's wrong." Yi Li looked down and said, "If young Master Ren feels that it's not wrong, then it's not wrong." Ren Qining weakly supported himself with his sword and muttered in a low voice, "Yes, if I feel that it's not wrong, then it's not wrong. If it's wrong, then my life, what is it?" Scenes from when he was young slowly flowed through his eyes. Since he was young, he had been entrusted with a heavy responsibility. He was the only descendant of the Lin family, the only hope for the previous dynasty to restore the country. Children of the same age, when others were acting spoiled in their parents' arms, he was in the study with his teacher to study the classics of governing the country. When others were playing, he was learning strategy and tactics. When others were sleeping soundly in their beds, He had to wake up early to practice martial arts, training in the winter and the hot summer. It was a pity that he wasn't a genius like Mo Xiaoyao. Now that he had fallen to such a state, it could only be said that this was his fate. But did anyone ask him what he wanted to do in this life? Have you ever done anything that you want to do? Chapter 845. A pair of beautiful and energetic eyes flashed past his eyes. At that time, he had just turned 20 years old, but as a young man, he met an innocent and intelligent girl who had never seen the world. She had saved his life, and in his spare time while he was recuperating, he had picked wild flowers and woven them into a garland for her. Her beautiful face was dyed with a faint red glow, and she was more moving than any woman he had ever seen. Then he married her and she gave birth to children for him. If he wasn't Lin Yuan, if he didn't have those responsibilities, Yili silently watched the blood-stained sword cut across his neck. The long sword fell to the ground with a clang, and the man in the dragon robe slowly fell down. Yili remembered that she had lived with Princess Helan for a while. She remembered that her cousin, the princess of the northern region and the former queen of Renqining, was called the Bright Pearl. Princess. Leng Haoyu and the others came forward and glanced at the person on the ground. Leng Haoyu couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect that he would actually. Yili sighed softly and said, give him a proper burial. He can be considered a formidable person. He will be posthumously conferred the title of Prince Chongqing, and be buried together with the Queen of the Northern Region. Zhuo Jing hesitated for a moment before saying, Princess, the ashes of the Queen of the Northern Region and several princesses and princes have been brought back to the Northern Region by Princess Helan. Yili thought for a moment. Set up a cenotaph for him. Send someone to send the ashes to the Northern Region. Let Princess Helan do as she pleases. After saying that, Yili, who was somewhat dispirited, no longer looked at the person on the ground and turned back to the camp. August 15th. It was time to go back. Let Princess Helan do as she pleases. Zhuo Jing smacked his lips. With Queen Helan's hatred for Renqining, she would scatter his ashes on the road and let people trample on them. After a while, someone came to see Renqining's body and took it away. The lakeside regained its tranquility. After a long time, a blue-clothed man appeared at the lakeside. He stared at the dark red bloodstains on the ground for a long time before reaching out to pick up the sword on the ground. He lifted up the hem of his robe and sliced open the sword. The blue-clothed man slowly wiped the dried blood on the sword and softly sighed, I really didn't expect that you would actually. I originally thought that there would be a battle between you and me, but it turned out that I hadn't even seen you seriously. The blue-clothed man casually threw away the cloth in his hand, flicked his sleeves, and left. The blood-stained blue cloth fluttered in the breeze and was blown into the rippling lake. It was slowly soaked, and blood slowly spread out in the lake. In the Mahist army's tent, Yili raised her head to look at the blue-clothed man in front of her. Her gaze paused on the sword in his hand for a moment before she asked, what are your plans? Tan Jiji smiled indifferently and said, if Wang Fei intends to continue to lock me up, it doesn't matter. If Wang Fei doesn't have this intention, then I want to leave. Yili raised an eyebrow and said with a faint smile, where are you going? Are you going to find a new place to start again? Tan Jiji shook his head and said, maybe I'll walk around, or go to the western regions, or go out to sea. Yili looked at him with interest and said, what about your ambitions? You don't want it anymore? Tan Jiji said with a bitter smile, with Prince Sting and Wang Fei here, no one else can interfere with my ambitions. This one still has some self-awareness. Seeing his end. I originally didn't understand, but now I feel that it doesn't matter anymore. Two people, the same name, the same mission and responsibility, but different experiences and different solutions. Seeing Renqining end up like this, Tan Jiji, who had always felt that he hated him deeply, felt a bit more sympathy for him. His original ambitions also became a bit more dull. The winds and clouds of the world come from my generation. Once I enter the Jianghu, time passes quickly. Talking and laughing about the ambitions of the emperor is not better than drinking in the mortal world. Yi Li softly said. Tan Jiji was slightly lost in thought, but then he smiled and nodded in praise. Wang Fei's temperament, such insight. Tan Jiji is ashamed. From now on, there is only Tan Jiji, there is no Lin Yuan. Wang Fei, this one will take his leave. Yi Li looked at him. Don't you plan to go back and see Dr. Lin? Tan Jiji shook his head and said with a bitter smile, forget it. Father probably doesn't want to see an unfilial son like me. In the future, please take care of me, Wang Fei. Yi Li nodded and said, fine, you decide. Tan Jiji didn't say anything else and cupped his hands, goodbye. I won't see you out. Seeing Tan Jiji leave, Qin Feng, who was behind Yi Li, whispered, Wang Fei, are we really letting him go here? If he has any other ideas, it will be troublesome. Yi Li shook her head and said, Tan Jiji is a smart person. He knows that he can't do anything, so he won't be obsessed with this. But, if he does anything else, there is no need to ask, just kill him. Qin Feng nodded. Tan Jiji was alone and had offended Mo Jingli. It wouldn't be easy for him to do anything. Wang Fei, Tan Jiji and Ren Qining, who is the orphan of the previous dynasty? Qin Feng asked curiously. Yi Li lightly shook her head and said with a smile, I don't know. Who is and who isn't, what's the point? Qin Feng thought for a moment and nodded with a smile, Wang Fei is right. Who really cared who was and who wasn't? If they were ambitious, even if they killed Tan Jiji, there would be a third and fourth Lin Yuan, Wang Yuan, Zhao Yuan. Chapter 846. Princess Ding Yi Li had defeated the Northern Territory King Ren Qining within a month. In 2 months, she had completely pacified the entire northeast region. The border with the Northern Territory Brute tribe had returned to where it was in the Dechu state. However, the returned territory and people were no longer citizens of the Dechu state. Instead, they were now under the king's manor. Even though the rulers of large countries like Great Chu, Xiling, and northern tribes could see that the foundation of the north was not stable and that there were many hidden dangers within, but there were still millions of people. Ding Wang Fei was able to pacify them in less than 3 months. It was shocking. From then on, Princess Ding Yi Li's achievements in the field of martial prowess did not belong to any of the past generals. The people below the Prince Ding mansion and outside the newly pacified Purple Thorns Pass revered Princess Ding like a god. In the Western Tomb's Genom of Gojoseon Palace, Lei Jinting was studying the map on the table with his head lowered. Ever since Infinite Boundless Mountain and Mo Jingli had gotten together, Mo Jingli had actually begun to vaguely show signs of provocation towards the Western Tomb. Infinite Boundless Mountain did indeed have some ability. In a few confrontations, they had caused Lei Jinting to suffer a few small losses. This had also strengthened Lei Jinting's determination to destroy Infinite Boundless Mountain. Below him, young Master Qingchen was sitting peacefully in his white robes. Even though Infinite Boundless Mountain was hidden deep within the mountains and had a natural formation as cover, young Master Qingchen's face did not have the slightest trace of worry. He was just leisurely sipping his tea, waiting for Lei Jinting's reaction. Father! Father! Lei Tingfeng hurried in with a letter in his hand. Lei Jinting could not help but frown. In terms of age, Lei Tingfeng was about the same as Su Qingchen and Mo Xiaoyao. However, not to mention their strategies and methods, their personalities were far from being as calm and collected as these two. It was no wonder that Lei Jinting had always been worried about his only son. In fact, Lei Tingfeng's ability and strategy might not be as good as Mo Xiaoyao and Su Qingchen, but he definitely wasn't any worse than people like Mo Jingli and Ren Qining. It was just that he was always under his father's shadow and lacked experience, so his personality was slightly lacking compared to others. Young Master Qingchen is still here. How can you make such a big fuss? What happened? Lei Jinting asked in a deep voice. Lei Tingfeng also saw Su Qingchen sitting at the side as soon as he entered the room. He was stunned and secretly regretted his rashness just now. However, being scolded by his father in front of Su Qingchen, his expression turned ugly. Su Qingchen put down the teacup and said with a smile, "Since Duke Rui is here, there must be something important. I will take my leave first." Glancing at the letter in Lei Tingfeng's hands, Lei Zhenting could roughly guess what it was about. He shook his head and said, "Young Master Qingchen is not an outsider. Just say it." Lei Tingfeng hesitated for a moment before handing the letter to Lei Zhenting. Princess Ding destroyed Ren Qining's million-strong army. Ren Qining committed suicide. What? Even someone like Lei Zhenting, who had been through many storms, couldn't help but be stunned. He couldn't blame his son for losing his composure just now. Originally, while Lei Zhenting didn't think highly of the alliance between the northern tribes and the northern territories, he was still happy to see it happen. After all, while he was cooperating with the Prince Ding mansion to deal with Infinite Boundless Mountain, he also had to guard against any sneak attacks from the Prince Ding mansion. With the northern territories holding them back, he was much more at ease. But who would have thought that just a mere Yi Li would be able to destroy the northern territories in just 2 months? Mo Xiaoyao hadn't even had to lift a finger. Was it the Prince Ding mansion that was too strong, or the northern territories that were too weak? Thinking of this, Lei Zhenting's expression as he looked at Su Qingchen also changed somewhat. Su Qingchen, however, seemed oblivious to it, her expression indifferent. Lei Zhenting calmed himself down before smiling at Su Qingchen. Princess Ding is indeed a female hero of her generation. I must congratulate young Master Qingchen and the Prince Ding mansion. Su Qingchen smiled mildly. While stabilizing the northern territories could be considered a stroke of good luck that couldn't be replicated, Su Qingchen was still extremely happy that his cousin had successfully accomplished such a great thing. Nodding with a slight smile, she said, "Many thanks to Prince Li is still young. It is also her luck that she was able to achieve such a feat by accident." Beside them, Lei Tingfeng's mouth couldn't help but twitch upon hearing this. Princess Ding had only been famous for less than 10 years. Guarding the eternal forest, suppressing the northwest, sweeping through the western tomb and now stabilizing the northern territories. Even his royal father had suffered a loss at her hands. Such a person was still young. When she was no longer young, how could she still live? Su Qingchen probably also felt that such humble words sounded more like bragging to others. Naturally, she changed the topic with a smile. "The matters of the northern territories are far away. Let's not bother about them. Instead, let's talk about how we should deal with Infinite Boundless Mountain. If our two families can't even take down Infinite Boundless Mountain, this Su will really have no face to return to Glass City." Lei Zhenting's and Lei Tingfeng's expressions also brightened. The northern territories was already a foregone conclusion. There was no point in dwelling on it. It was just that the borders of the northern territories would have to be carefully rearranged. However, before their eyes, if it were the tens of thousands of mighty soldiers of Jinan Palace as well as the wise young Master Qingchen, they wouldn't be able to take down a mere Infinite Boundless Mountain. That Ren Qining wasn't the #1 joke under the heavens. They were. Moreover, Mo Jingli relied on Infinite Boundless Mountain's support to provoke them time and time again at the Cloud Mist River. Lei Zhenting definitely wouldn't be able to tolerate this. Now that Infinite Boundless Mountain was not destroyed, the Prince Ding mansion would only lose some face. To the Western Tomb, it was already a great enemy. Lei Zhenting nodded. Young Master Qingchen's words make sense. I wonder if young Master Qingchen has any thoughts on the natural grand formation within the Infinite Boundless Mountain range? Su Qingchen frowned. Although I have already seen the map, it is still incomplete at the end of the day. I, however, have some thoughts. However, I need to personally head to Infinite Boundless Mountain in order to verify them. Lei Zhenting said, there have been some small matters by the Cloud Mist River recently. I cannot accompany young Master there. Quan will lead 50,000 elite soldiers to accompany young Master to Infinite Boundless Mountain. What does young Master think? Su Qingchen nodded, cupping his hands towards Lei Tingfeng, smiling, then I will have to trouble Duke Rui. Lei Tingfeng hurriedly returned the greeting, it is my duty. Young Master Qingchen need not mind it. After sending Su Qingchen off, Lei Zhenting and his son were speechless for a long time in the study. Lei Tingfeng asked somewhat worriedly, "Father, are we just going to leave the matters of the northern territories to their own devices?" Lei Zhenting smiled bitterly, "How are we going to manage it? The northern territories have nothing to do with our western tomb in the first place. Also, it was the northern territories themselves who first provoked the Prince Ding mansion. Even if they were to perish, they would only be seeking their own deaths. It's just that, even I did not expect that this Yi Li would actually be so." Lei Tingfeng could not help but sigh in admiration. Princess Ding is truly not something that any woman in this world can compare to. Even those few from Infinite Boundless Mountain are probably worlds apart when compared to Princess Ding. Lei Zhenting looked at the letter that Lei Tingfeng had presented to him. Princess Ding has conferred upon Ren Qining the title of Duke of Chongqing. Such grace. Back in the Western Tomb, Ren Qining had plotted to assassinate Yi Li, which had also directly led to the Western Tomb's nobles being massacred by Mo Xiaoyao until rivers of blood flowed. For such a person, it was already rather good that Yi Li had not seen his corpse torn apart and tossed into the wilderness. She had actually conferred upon him the title of Duke, and given him a noble burial. Chapter 847. Even though Ding Wangfei is a woman, she already has the heart and bearing of a man who can turn the clouds with one hand and look down on the world. Lei Zhenting sighed softly. The father and son sighed again and again. In the end, they could only sigh at Mo Xiaoyao's good fortune. Jiangnan, Dechu State, in the regent's mansion. When Mo Jingli received the news, he was not as calm as Lei Zhenting and his son. With a wave of his hand, he swept the things on the desk to the ground. He clutched the letter in his hand so tightly that the veins on the back of his hand popped out. Yi Li. What a good Yi Li. No matter how much power he had now, Mo Jingli felt extremely unwilling at all times. Perhaps he had understood a long time ago that abandoning that woman back then was his greatest loss and regret in this life. And now, every inch of the Prince Ding mansion's achievements seemed to indicate his incompetence. The news that Yi Li had pacified the north was even more like a mockery to him. "What are you making a fuss about?" Dongfang Yu appeared at the door of the study. She had taken off her snow-white clothes and put on the beautiful clothes of the regent's consort. Dongfang Yu's originally beautiful face was now even more graceful and luxurious. Just by looking at the cold and seemingly mocking gaze that she was looking at Mo Jingli with, one would not think that they were a newlywed couple. Mo Jingli's face darkened. He said unhappily, "What are you doing here?" Dongfang Yu ignored his expression. She calmly stepped into the study, crossed the messy floor, and stood in front of Mo Jingli. She said with a smile that was not a smile, "Are you angry because the Prince Ding mansion and Yi Li destroyed Ren Qining?" Mo Jingli snorted softly and said mockingly, "The Infinite Boundless Mountain's news is indeed fast." Dongfang Yu raised her eyebrows, saying, "The Infinite Boundless Mountain's news is naturally fast. What's so strange about that? I already knew about this news 10 days ago." Mo Jingli's expression changed. He grabbed Dongfang Yu and said, 10 days ago. Why don't you say it? Dongfang Yu slapped his hand away casually and laughed disdainfully, "Why should I say it? Do you think that you can control the Infinite Boundless Mountain just because I married you? Mo Jingli, you think too highly of yourself. My master agreed to assist you because he had no other choice. Why don't you take a look at what kind of material you are?" Mo Jingli's face contorted as he was mocked by his own wife. He pushed Dongfang Yu away and scolded angrily, "Slut! You!" Dongfang Yu interrupted him unceremoniously. "My master told me to tell you, don't always make your own decisions. Why don't you take a look at your current strength? If you really provoke Lei Zhenting, you won't be able to bear the consequences." With that, Dongfang Yu turned and walked out of the door, ignoring Mo Jingli's expression. Mo Jingli stared coldly at Dongfang Yu's back as she disappeared through the door. He clenched his teeth, saying, "Dong Fang Yu, No matter how much Mo Jingli clenched his teeth, he was still unable to change the fact that he was currently unable to touch Dongfang Yu. When he had planned to marry Dongfang Yu back then, he had only wanted the power of the infinite boundless mountain. Now that he had it, he also understood why Mo Xiaoyao had been so dismissive of the infinite boundless mountain's power. Why had the always ambitious Lei Zhenting not interfered in the affairs of the infinite boundless mountain from the start? That's right, the infinite boundless mountain's power was indeed shocking. With the help of the infinite boundless mountain's power, the Dechu state's power had increased greatly in just a few short months. Even if they were to clash with Lei Zhenting now, they might still be able to put up a fight. But at the same time, he was also restricted by the infinite boundless mountain. Many of his decisions had to be approved by Dongfang Hui, and Dongfang Yu was even more hateful towards him, finding fault with him everywhere. The dignified regent of the Dechu state was actually restricted by 2 women. Such humiliation, no matter how great his power was, could not make up for the anger in Mo Jingli's heart. Just as everyone was discussing, Yili had already finished dealing with the affairs of Chongqing City. She threw the rest of the trivial matters to Ling Huai and Ling Haoyu, and brought Zhuo Jing and the others into the pass, heading towards the Mahist army camp where Mo Xiaoyao was. Mo Xiaoyao had long been waiting outside the door. When he saw Yi Li and the others riding over, he immediately flew up to welcome them, landing on Yi Li's horse. Yi Li's horse was also a Fergana horse that was 1 in 10,000. Even when a person landed on it, it did not panic in the slightest, and continued to walk forward steadily. Mo Xiaoyao sat behind Yi Li, one hand around her waist, the other holding the reins. The horse whinnied and turned to run in another direction. Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and the others looked at each other, not knowing whether to chase or not. A moment later, Qin Feng shook his head and said, "Let's go back first. With the prince and the princess together, nothing will happen." The prince clearly wanted to be alone with the princess. If they did not know what was good for them and followed, wouldn't the prince remember them in his heart? Who knew when they would be in big trouble? The others also felt that this was very reasonable, and they rode their horses in the direction of the camp. When the time came, the generals who were waiting outside the camp to welcome the princess' return were left waiting for nothing. They looked at each other and could only rub their noses and go back. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li rode the same horse. After a while, Mo Xiaoyao did not pay attention to it. He allowed it to roam on its own, and even stopped to nibble on the grass on the ground. Mo Xiaoyao only pulled Yi Li into his arms, his chin resting on her shoulder as he rubbed intimately. "Princess Li, you finally came back. I missed you so much." Yi Li helplessly turned her head and kissed his face. She leaned into his arms and said softly, "I also missed you." Mo Xiaoyao's eyes lit up. He lifted her small chin and stared at those warm and red lips as he fiercely kissed her. "Princess Li, Xiaoyao, don't make a fuss." Yi Li was frightened by his sudden passion. Mo Xiaoyao was not willing to stop. He raised a hand to hold the back of her head and deepened the kiss. Yi Li was helpless. She sighed inside and raised a hand to wrap around his neck. She also sank into an intimate entanglement. Mo Xiaoyao hugged Yi Li and leaned to the side. The two of them immediately fell off the back of the horse. Yi Li reflexively hugged Mo Xiaoyao. The two of them landed on the grass and rolled a long way before they stopped. Mo Xiaoyao looked down at the blushing face below him and planted a series of lingering kisses. He buried his head in Yi Li's hair and laughed softly. Princess Li, silver and black hair tangled together. It was exceptionally eye-catching, but it also seemed like they were meant to be tangled together. Yi Li smiled and said softly, "Xiaoyao, I'm back." Mo Xiaoyao helped Yi Li up and the two of them sat side by side on the grass. It turned out that Yi Li's horse had been strolling casually and had arrived at a col not far away. The two of them sat on the col and looked down. From afar, they could see the northern tribe's army camp. Princess Li managed to pacify the northern region in a short 2 months. Your husband, on the other hand, has not made any progress in these 2 months. I'm so ashamed. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li and laughed mockingly. Yi Li reached out and pinched his handsome face. She smiled and said, "Take the northern tribes and the northern region as an example. Why didn't Yi fight you to the death?" Although they were two different countries, the difference between the northern tribes and the northern region was like the difference between clouds and mud. The northern tribes had been established for hundreds of years. Every dynasty had invaded the Central Plains. Although they had never truly attacked the Central Plains, the northern tribes were the biggest threat to the Central Plains. Moreover, the climate of the northern tribes was harsh and the people were valiant. Their martial spirit was much stronger than that of the northern region. It could be said that although Yi had formed an alliance with the northern region, he had only treated Ren Qining as a pawn to contain the Mahist army. He had never treated him as an equal. Chapter 848. Mo Xiaoyao gently rubbed his face against Yi Li's and smiled. "He doesn't want to fight me to the death, he only wants my life." Yi still wanted to return to the northern tribes to fight for the position of king of the northern tribes for Hong. Why would he fight Mo Xiaoyao to the death? Unfortunately, in this world, there were many people who wanted Mo Xiaoyao's life, but Mo Xiaoyao was still alive, and the more he lived, the better. Hong and Princess Ronghua have already returned? Yi Li asked. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. "That's right, but Helianzhen has already arrived. He even brought 800,000 men with him. Right now, there are at least 1,300,000 men in the northern tribes camp." "So many?" Yi Li frowned slightly. No wonder Mo Xiaoyao had been talking for so long but had not made any progress. Not to mention the soldiers and horses that the Prince Ding mansion had taken back from the Dechu state, the Mahist army's elite soldiers numbered less than 1 million, and they also had to guard the various places. In terms of soldiers and horses, they could not compete with the northern tribes. Mo Xiaoyao smiled coldly, "The more the better. I promised Hong that I would not touch the northern tribes' foundations, but since they came here of their own accord, they can forget about going back." Seeing the killing intent that flashed across Mo Xiaoyao's face, Yi Li tenderly kissed his cold cheeks and said softly, "Don't worry, we will avenge Big Brother." Mo Xiaoyao nodded. "Li, thank you." The two led their horses down the hill. At the foot of the hill, there was a small village. There were very few people in the small village. The villagers' eyes were dim, and they were as thin as bones. Their ragged clothes were unbearable to look at. Yi Li couldn't help but feel a lump in her throat when she thought of how the people under the rule of the Northwest Prince Ding mansion lived in peace and contentment, and then looked at these exhausted and despairing people. Seeing her staring at those people in a daze, Mo Xiaoyao could not help but sigh softly. He pulled her into his arms and promised in a low voice, "We will definitely get rid of the northern tribes as soon as possible." Yi Li was a little puzzled as she asked, "Why are these people not leaving this place?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. "Where can we go if we leave this place?" Even though the Prince Ding mansion was able to accommodate them, many of them starved to death on their journey. Besides, the Northwest was too small to accommodate so many people. Which part of the world isn't in chaos? Even if they fled to the South was not peaceful either. There were also many elderly, women, and children. Firstly, it was difficult to leave their homeland, and secondly, they did not have the ability to travel so far. This village was the same. If the young people did not join the army, they would have fled. Those left behind were the elderly who could not leave, and the young and helpless children. They were already considered lucky. More than half of the people in the north had already been killed when the northern tribes invaded the Great Pass. Villages like this are everywhere. Saying this, Mo Xiaoyao could not help but feel sad. When the northern tribes invaded the Dechu state, he was planning to attack Xiling naturally. There were no soldiers in the northwest to help the Dechu state resist the northern tribes. Even though the Prince Ding mansion had severed all ties with the Dechu state at that time, they had not done anything wrong in terms of reputation. But facing these worried and numb people, Mo Xiaoyao's heart was not made of iron. He could not help but feel a trace of guilt. Are the two of you His Highness Prince Ding and Wang Fei?" The two of them led their horses and walked slowly. Suddenly, an old trembling voice came from the side of the road. The two of them looked over and saw a 70-year-old white-haired man in ragged clothes by the side of the road. He was supporting himself with a wooden staff and trembling as he looked at the two of them. Mo Xiaoyao looked silently at the old man for a while before asking, "How do you know?" The old man said emotionally, "I heard that His Highness Prince Sting is in his prime but has a head of white hair, and I also heard that Prince Sting's army camp is just a few dozen li away. Prince, Wang Fei, I beg you to save the people of the Dechu state." As he spoke, the old man's staff tilted and he knelt on the ground, tears streaming down his face. Not far away, a few villagers heard the old man's words and hurriedly ran over. In a short while, they all knelt on the ground, crying. Yi Li looked around. As expected, the people present were either old people in their 60s or 70s or children of a few years old. There were also some women and children. Other than the ignorant children, everyone had a deep and worried expression on their faces. When they looked at Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao, they had a bit of hope. Yi Li bent down to help the old man up. She was also speechless for a while. Tilting her head to look at Mo Xiaoyao, she saw that he was also silent. Yi Li asked in a light voice, "Elder, are you willing to leave this place?" The old man shook his head and said, "We are already people with one foot in the grave. Where can we go? I only hope that Wang Yi and Wang Fei can chase those thieves out so that they can take revenge for our fellow villagers who died so tragically. So that we, the children who don't know anything yet, can grow up safely and peacefully. Us old people, if we die, then we die." Yi Li looked at the sallow complexions of these people and knew how hard their days were. She sighed and said, "I will have people send some food over later. In another 2 months, it will be winter. But if it is possible, you should move back a little." When the autumn harvest comes, the northern tribe's soldiers will definitely come out to steal the food. In a few days, the two armies will be at war and this place will not be peaceful. The old man was hesitant. Their village was closest to the front line of the two armies and was often harassed by the northern tribe's soldiers. Luckily, the northern tribe's soldiers were no longer like when they first entered the pass and killed everyone they saw. But these people were either old and weak or young and ignorant. Where could they go? Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice, "About 60 li back, there are a few villages. There are not many people left. You can live there. The battle line will not move back. You can live there without worry. Tomorrow, I will send people to escort you there." Mo Xiaoyao's words were equivalent to a promise. No matter what happened at the front line, as long as the Mahist army had a single soldier, they would not retreat a single step. Hearing this, everyone was overjoyed. Tears of joy flowed down their faces as they kowtowed to Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao. Yi Li helplessly helped the old man up and pulled up a small child beside him. The child was about 5 or 6 years old. He raised his head and looked at Yi Li without fear. Yi Li smiled at him. The child immediately blushed and grabbed the old man's sleeve to hide behind him. Yi Li thought of Mo Xiaobao, Ling Junhan, Su Jirue and the rest who were in high spirits in the Prince Sting mansion. Then she looked at the small and skinny child in front of her who was wearing old clothes that did not fit him. Because of what they saw at the foot of the mountain, the two did not have the mood to wander around and could only return to the camp together. When they returned to the camp, all the generals came out to welcome them. At this time, other than Zhang Qilan guarding Xiling, General Yuan Pei guarding Feihong Pass, Murongshan guarding Chujing, and Leng Hui far away in Chongqing, all the famous generals of the Mahist army were gathered in the camp. There were more than 10 of them. "Princess Consort, you have pacified the north. I congratulate you." Young Master Feng San was dressed in flamboyant red clothes. He was not as handsome as the generals in their battle robes. But he was elegant and had an extraordinary aura. Yi Li smiled faintly and saluted, "It is all thanks to everyone. Young Master Feng San, you flatter me." Chapter 849. All the generals congratulated Yi Li in unison. They were already very respectful of this Princess Ding. Now that she had pacified the north, no one in the Mahist army dared to doubt Princess Ding's abilities. With Yi Li's return, Mo Xiaoyao was in a good mood. He dismissed everyone, leaving only Lu Jingxian and the others to discuss matters. Everyone couldn't help but ask about Yi Li's matters in the north. Yi Li did not want to dampen everyone's spirits and could only pick some important matters to talk about. Everyone sighed at Ren Qi Ning's bad luck and the Prince Ding mansion's good luck. As expected, the heavens were on the side of the Prince Ding mansion. On the other hand, they also sighed at Wang Fei's methods and foresight. They may be able to pacify the north, but to take down the north so easily, it could be said to be without shedding a drop of blood. There probably weren't two people present who could do it. Hearing Yi Li finish, Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment and said, "It's enough to have Ling Huai and Ling Haoyu in Chongqing. Later, let's have He Su come back." Yi Li raised an eyebrow and said, "It seems that this side is a bit troublesome. There are many fierce generals in the army, and He Su has to come back." Lu Jingxian and the others knew that He Su was one of Yi Li's people and said with a smile, "Wang Fei is right. He Su has been neglected by the king of the northern tribes these years. It's rare that he hasn't been dispirited, and has cultivated a few talents. Right now, the northern tribes has millions of soldiers, and many fierce generals. I've heard that General He's ability to lead troops is the best among the young generals. If he can come, it is a good thing." Marquis Nan stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Yes, Wang Fei has many capable people under her command. Right now, among the young generals, General He Su is better. Instead, it's my son who's a good-for-nothing." After saying this, Marquis Nan glared at Fu Zhao as if he expected better from him. Fu Zhao rubbed his nose innocently. It wasn't that he didn't work hard, it was just that this world was full of evildoers. Yi Li laughed and said, "Southern Marquis is exaggerating. Shitzi is a rare talent in both pen and sword. How can He Su compare to him?" He lowered his head and thought for a moment before saying, "That's good too. General Ling Huai is a person of virtue and prestige, and Ling Haoyu has a flexible personality. With them overseeing Chongqing, I'm sure that the areas outside of Redbud Pass will quickly return to their former prosperity. On the other hand, what kind of famous general is there in the northern region barracks that even General Lu is afraid of?" Lu Jingxian said, "In the northern militant army, there is a young general called Helian Peng. He should be a junior of Helian Zhen. However, in terms of using troops, Helian Zhen was probably slightly inferior to him." Currently, the northern militant army had Yelu Yi, Helian Zhen, and Helian Peng, as well as millions of elite soldiers. That's quite troublesome. Although it was a bit troublesome, Lu Jinxian's face didn't show the slightest hint of annoyance. Instead, he was eager to fight. Since Yelu Hong has already returned to the northern militant army, Yelu Yi is now in charge of the army. I wonder if Yelu Hong will be successful after returning to the northern militant army. If everything goes well, Yelu Yi won't be able to hold on for long. Yi Li pondered. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows in disdain and said, "If Yelu Hong can't even handle such a small matter, he might as well die. Since Miss Li has also returned, I also want to meet Helian Zhen. I want to see if he's still the same as before." Speaking of Helian Zhen, Mo Xiaoyao's eyes couldn't help but become a bit more vicious. It wasn't that Helian Zhen was a genius, but that the Prince Ding mansion hadn't suffered a single defeat in over 100 years. However, it just so happened that he had fallen into Helian Zhen's hands. Although it wasn't a battle loss, a loss was still a loss. It had to be said that the battle from over a decade ago was the most humiliating one the Prince Ding mansion had fought in over 100 years. It was also the battle where they suffered the most losses. How could Mo Xiaoyao not remember Helian Zhen? Not long after Mo Xiaoyao remembered Helian Zhen also didn't forget Mo Xiaoyao. That year, Helian Zhen was the #1 general of the northern militant army. He was about to defeat the Prince Ding mansion and become the war god of the northern militant army. However, Mo Xiaoyao, a young man who wasn't even 18 years old, suddenly appeared out of nowhere and burned him until he threw away his armor and fled in defeat. In that battle, the northern militant army didn't invest any less soldiers than now. They were about to achieve a complete victory, but in the end, they were almost completely wiped out. Although Mo Xiaoyao also paid a heavy price, the northern militant army's losses were also extremely heavy. In the northern tribe's camp, Yi sat on the main seat, and below him sat a white-bearded old general in his 50s and a muscular young man in his late 20s, exuding a valiant aura. However, he was different from the typical northern militant army soldier. His eyes were calm and sharp, rarely seen in the northern militant army soldiers. These two people were the northern militant army's general Helian Zhen and his adopted son Helian Peng, who had come to reinforce Yi. Originally, before Mo Xiaoyao and Helian Zhen arrived, the two armies fought a small battle every 3 days and a big battle every 5 days. When the commander-in-chief arrived, everyone calmed down and became more cautious in their attacks. In this half a month, neither side took the initiative to provoke the other. I've said it before, Ren Qining isn't good enough. We should have found Lei Zhenting as an ally from the start. Helian Zhen said in a low voice. Yeluye's expression was gloomy as he said coldly, I really didn't expect Ren Qining to be so incompetent. He was actually forced to commit suicide by a woman in less than 3 months. His entire army was almost wiped out. The reason why we chose him was because of the geography, but also because Lei Zhenting is too ambitious and cunning. He is not as easy to control as Ren Qining. Helian Zhen said, then what should we do now? The 7th prince has made a military pledge to the king that he will not return to the northern militant army until he destroys the Mahist army. Now that Princess Ding has pacified the north, soon, the Prince Ding mansion will send more troops here. I'm afraid it's too late to join forces with Lei Zhenting now. Now Lei Zhenting was not without worries. Mo Jingli was also eyeing him covetously in Jiangnan. In Xiling, the Emperor of Xiling was also watching Lei Zhenting at all times, waiting for him to reveal a flaw so that he could seize power in one fell swoop. If Lei Zhenting were to fight to the death with the Prince Ding mansion at this time, it would be hard to say who would win if both sides joined forces. But no matter who won or lost, the unlucky one would be Lei Zhenting himself. Yeluyi sighed and said, fortunately, our military strength is far greater than Mo Xiaoyao's. We still have a chance of winning. Helian Peng, who had been sitting silently at the side, raised his head and said, Prince, you may not be right. Yeluyi raised his eyebrows and said, what do you mean? Helian Peng said, although our military strength is far greater than the Mahist armies, but Central was originally the Mahist army's territory. As long as they want to expand their army, I'm afraid they can gather millions of troops in the blink of an eye. Even if they are not as elite as the original Mahist army, they will still be somewhat useful. Moreover, in this general's opinion, Mo Xiaoyao is not a person without foresight. It is impossible for him not to know that the Mahist army's military strength is far less than the other countries. Why is it that he has not implemented his conscription at all? Yeluyi could not help but frown. He stared seriously at Helian Peng and asked, You mean to say that Mo Xiaoyao is hiding his strength? Helian Peng nodded and said, that's right. This general believes that the Mahist army's military strength is definitely more than what we know. I'm afraid that Mo Xiaoyao has hidden a large number of troops in places that we do not know about, waiting to deal a fatal blow to our army. Your Highness must not lower your guard. Chapter 850. Yeluyi nodded, he wasn't really a condescending person. When facing Mo Xiaoyao, he was willing to be more cautious. Yeluyi said, Helian, what do you think? Helian Peng said, I plan to test the strength of the Mahist army. Yeluyi looked at him with interest and said, how do you plan to test it? In the past half year, our army has fought with the Mahist army dozens of times. I can only say that the Mahist army is indeed worthy of being the iron-blooded army that has shaken the world for more than 200 years. When mentioning the fighting strength of the Mahist army, even Yeluyi couldn't help but sigh in admiration. The physical strength of the people of the Central Plains was not as good as the nomads. Although many people of the Central Plains practiced internal strength and martial arts, they could fight 1 against 10. But in the end, practicing martial arts required time and not everyone could practice high-level martial arts. So for a long time, the fighting strength of the Central Plains was always weaker than the northern tribes. But the Mahist army was clearly an exception. Every soldier of the Mahist army had strength that was completely different from the northern tribes. This made the battle more intense every time the two armies clashed. Helian Peng thought for a moment and said, "Qi Lin. Qi Lin." When these words came out, even Yelu Yi and Helian Jin couldn't help but be moved. Qi Lin hadn't been an army for a long time, but they had made many outstanding contributions. In many of the great victories of the Mahist army, their shadows could be seen, but very few people in the world had actually seen them. He was like a ghost. Yelu Yi said, "Qi Lin was created by the Ding King's wife and is also the most mysterious troop of the Mahist army led by the Ding King's wife." Helian Peng wants to challenge the Ding King's wife? Helian Peng raised his eyebrows and said, "Can't I?" Yelu Yi smiled and said, "It's not that you can't. I thought that Helian Peng was arrogant and wanted to directly challenge Mo Xiaoyao." Helian Peng said indifferently, "This general will not look down on women, especially when this woman is the imperial consort. Furthermore, I don't know why, but I have a feeling that if we don't get rid of this Qi Lin, the northern tribes will fall into their hands sooner or later." Yelu Yi trembled slightly, asking, "How do you know?" Helian Peng muttered to himself for a moment before saying, "I don't know either. I just have this feeling." Ever since Qi Lin appeared, he had always caught the enemy off guard. Every time he attacked, he would always attack the enemy's vital points and never miss. We, the warriors of the northern tribes, may not fear anyone on the battlefield, but it is our weakness to deal with enemies that come and go like ghosts. Yelu Yi nodded in agreement. After dealing with the Mahist army for so long, he naturally knew about this. However, the strengths and weaknesses of the northern tribes were accumulated over thousands of years and could not be changed in a short period of time. How does Helian Peng plan to deal with Qi Lin? Helian Jin smiled and said, "Ever since Qi Lin appeared, Peng has been very interested in these people. Therefore, we have also trained a group of people to deal with Qi Lin." Hearing this, Yelu Yi was really surprised. He looked at Helian Peng and asked, "Really?" All these years, his imperial father had been very displeased with Helian Jin and had even removed his military power. Under such circumstances, how could Yelu Yi not be surprised that he was able to train such a group of people? If this war did not happen, this group of people who could kill an invisible people would be perfect to deal with Yelu Hong. Helian Peng's expression did not change as he nodded and said, "That's right. They originally called Qi Lin a benevolent beast, but it was too weak and lacked some killing intent. This group of people, I call them Yazi." Yazi. Although Yelu Yi was from the northern tribes, as a prince, he naturally had some understanding of the culture of the Central Plains. Yazi, one of the 9 sons of the dragon. It looked like a jackal and liked to kill. Although it was called a dragon, it was actually a ferocious beast. This made Yelu Yi curious. Helian Peng actually had some understanding of the culture of the Central Plains. "That's right." Helian Jin said loudly, "Back then, I was careless and lost to Mo Xiaoyao, that ignorant brat. If I can't get rid of this humiliation, I won't be able to face the ancestors of the Helian family even if I die. For this day, I have waited for more than 10 years. Rest assured, 7th Prince, this time, we will definitely make sure that the Mahist army will never be able to rise again." Yelu Yi naturally knew of Helian Jin's hatred towards Mo Xiaoyao. It could be said that half of Helian Jin's life was spent in the Prince Ding mansion and also in the Prince Ding mansion. Half of his life was spent in the military, and his greatest achievement was defeating the Mahist army and killing Mo Xiaoyan. However, his greatest defeat was also losing to the Mahist army, losing to Mo Xiaoyao. Nodding, Yelu Yi said in a low voice, "Then I will have to trouble Uncle and Helian. I will quietly listen to the good news. What does Helian Peng plan to do?" Helianpeng pondered for a moment and said, Yili has just returned, she definitely won't be ready to guard against us so quickly. What I mean is, tonight, we will attack at night. Yi hesitated for a moment, are you confident? Helianpeng smiled and said, rest assured, Your Highness, it's just a test. In that case, it's approved. Chapter 851. Late at night, outside the Mahist army's camp, a group of agile men dressed in black silently snuck in. Although this was not the main camp of the Mahist army that Prince Ding personally oversaw, the main camp was only 20 or so li away and was closely connected to the main camp. Moreover, this was the place where most of the rations were stored. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was the Mahist army's frontline supply granary, and the tight security was self-evident. However, these people were able to sneak in without alerting anyone, and this was enough to show how outstanding their abilities were. In the quiet camp, other than the patrolling soldiers coming and going, all of the soldiers had already fallen asleep. In the darkness of the night, only the cawing of the night crows could be heard from time to time, making people feel a sense of unease. The leader raised his hand to stop the people behind him from moving forward, and looked around vigilantly. Suddenly, he said in a low and hurried voice, We've been discovered, retreat. The others were also startled, and before they could react, a rain of silver arrows pierced through the night sky. Retreat! The men in black were all skilled, and almost at the same time, they scattered in all directions. The barracks were immediately lit up. A man dressed in black walked out from the darkness, and a cold smile appeared on his lips. Since you've come, don't leave. Chase! Countless black figures streaked across the hidden corners of the camp, chasing in the direction of the fleeing black-clothed men. These men in black did not immediately escape, and instead ran all over the place, and many of them even headed towards the area where the rations were stored. It was clear that they wanted to destroy most of the Mahist army's rations in one fell swoop. It had to be known that before the army moved, the rations would move first. In this era, when two armies fought, other than fighting strength and tactics, they also competed with rations. Without rations, even if you were the strongest soldier in the world, you would only end up starving to death. Their plan was very good, but how could the Mahist army, which had been around for hundreds of years, not have considered this problem? As soon as they entered the storage area, they were surrounded by a group of equally mysterious black-clothed men. Both sides attacked each other without saying a word. Not far away from the camp, Su Qingfeng was standing at the edge of a cliff, dressed in black, looking down at the camp with a gloomy face. Standing next to him were the unrestrained Han Mingxi and the graceful Han Mingyue brothers. Behind them stood a group of men in black who were also eyeing the flickering flames of the camp not far away. What a nice place. Han Mingxi smiled at Su Qingfeng. Originally, he and Han Mingyue had been ordered to escort the provisions over, but they didn't expect to see such a good show. Han Mingyue pondered for a moment before saying, These people seem to act in a similar way as Qilin. Su Qingfeng said proudly, I'm just copying the wisdom of others. Painting the skin of a tiger is difficult to paint the bones. For the northern tribes to be able to do this, it's not bad. Since they provoked us first, it's not right if we don't teach them a lesson. Men. Commander. A black-clothed man stepped forward and bowed. Su Qingfeng said, There's a northern tribes camp 60 miles away from here. Why don't you guys go and have some fun? Yes, Commander. The black-clothed man replied. With a wave of his hand, he disappeared into the night with the other black-clothed men. The rest of them didn't say anything else and looked down at the camp below. This place looked ordinary, but standing on the cliff, one could take in the entire camp. In this way, no matter how powerful the northern tribes were, they wouldn't be able to escape Qilin's eyes. They're retreating. The northern tribes knew that they couldn't succeed, and they were sent here to test the waters. If they could burn the provisions of the Mahist army, it would be a good thing, but if they couldn't, it didn't matter. Seeing that they couldn't gain the upper hand, they immediately prepared to retreat. Su Qingfeng rubbed his chin and laughed, Since they were sent here to test us, we'll just let one of them go. Kill the rest. Han Mingxi, who was standing by the side, couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Letting one of them go was more embarrassing than letting none of them go. It was obvious that he was telling the northern tribes that since they had sent someone to investigate, he would leave one person to report back to them. He was not afraid of them investigating. Originally, he thought that among the brothers of the Su family, Su Qingfeng was the kindest. He didn't expect him to be such a bad person. The northern tribes wanted to escape, so Qi Lin let them go. However, they didn't let them go. Instead, they moved the battlefield outside the camp. There were originally more than 20 black-clothed men, but they were soon split up and fought their own battles. In less than an hour, the brightly lit camp returned to silence. In the darkness, 3 black-clothed men ran frantically in the direction of the northern tribe's camp. In such a moonless night, although there were some stars, it was not enough to illuminate the path ahead. The 3 of them ran through the forest in a panic, not knowing where to go, and actually lost their way. They stopped and looked in the direction they came from. It seemed that no one was chasing them, so they heaved a sigh of relief. One of them couldn't help but say, "I didn't expect these Central Plains people to be so powerful." They were carefully trained by Helian Zhen and Helian Peng over the past few years. They were much more powerful than the average northern tribe's soldiers. The people of the northern tribes were known for their martial prowess. These soldiers of the Yazi army even looked down on the ordinary soldiers of the northern tribes, let alone the people of the Central Plains who had always been weak. However, they didn't expect the Yazi army to be so powerful that they couldn't even gain an advantage in a one-on-one battle. They were even at a disadvantage. That's because the Central Plains people are cunning and set up an ambush. Another person refused to admit defeat. His skills were above the rest, and he wasn't at a disadvantage when fighting against the Mahist army. It was just that they were outnumbered and had no choice but to escape. Naturally, he refused to admit defeat. The remaining person couldn't help but frown and say, "We seem to be lost. It's better to return to the camp quickly." The other 2 nodded in agreement. They had been running in the forest for more than 2 hours, but they still couldn't find the way out. It was obvious that they were lost in the forest. The elite Yazi army of the northern tribes actually got lost. What a joke! In the forest, a burst of hearty laughter came from the darkness. However, it was erratic, and no one could determine the source of the laughter. The 3 of them changed their expressions. "Who is it? How do you know about Yazi?" Yazi was Helian Zhen's secret trump card. Not to mention outsiders, even the king of the northern tribes and Yelu Yi didn't know about it beforehand. They didn't expect the other party to expose their identities. The person laughed and said, "How can the Mahist army not know about any barbarian who dares to step into the Central Plains?" "Qi Lin." The 3 of them said in unison. They stared at the void in the darkness with vigilance. "It's Qi Lin. Didn't you want to experience the power of my Qi Lin? Why are you leaving?" The person in the darkness laughed. The leader of the men in black said sternly, "Come out and fight if you have the ability. Do you Central Plains people only know how to sneak around?" The man in the darkness laughed coldly and said, "I'm just about to teach you a lesson." A black shadow shot out like a ray of light. The 3 men from the northern tribes didn't even get to see the person's face clearly. The man in the lead only felt a chill on his neck. A cold hand was strangling his neck. With a slight force, the man from the northern tribes made a gurgling sound and fell to the ground, lifeless. Chapter 852. The remaining 2 men from the northern tribes roared angrily and charged at the black figure. The black figure snorted and a cold light flashed. The cold light of the soft sword danced in the night like a dazzling flower. In just a moment, another person fell to the ground. The remaining man from the northern tribes was scared out of his wits. As long as one was human, one would be afraid of death. Even though the northern tribes were more courageous than the people of the Central Plains, it did not mean that they were less afraid of death. If it was on the battlefield, the 2 armies might not care about life and death. However, in the darkness of the night, facing this mysterious black figure and the corpses of two of his comrades lying beside him, the man from the northern tribes, who had been running for more than 2 hours, finally had a mental breakdown. He roared angrily and charged at the black figure without caring about the difference in skill. The black figure laughed coldly and appeared behind the man from the northern tribes. His palm landed on the back of the man's neck. The man from the northern tribes fell to the ground in a daze. The forest regained its peace. The man in black kept his soft sword and turned to walk out of the forest. Outside the forest, Su Qingfeng, Han Mingxi and the rest were already waiting there. Walking out of the dark forest, a handsome face was revealed under the starlight. Who else could it be but Zhuo Jing? Han Mingxi leaned against a tree and yawned in boredom. Just 3 escaped thieves. Is there a need for Princess Ding's most trusted aide to personally deal with them? Making a mountain out of a molehill. Zhuo Jing ignored Han Mingxi's mockery and said lightly, the princess consort only wants to know how strong these people are. Su Qingfeng asked curiously, how is it? They had watched the battle from beginning to end. Naturally, they could see that these people's strength was not far from Qi Lin's. He was indeed worthy of being trained by Helian Zhen after spending countless years and countless efforts. Zhuo Jing smiled. Their skills are not bad. However, they are lacking in other aspects. In Qi Lin's training, individual skills were important. However, it was not absolute. Among the Qilins, there were also some whose skills were only slightly better than ordinary soldiers. However, he had a specialty that no one else could match. Moreover, Qi Lin was good at teamwork. If one was surrounded by them, even if one was a top expert in the world, it would not be easy to escape. Other than that, there were also various skills training sessions. Tonight's incident where the northern tribes got lost in the forest would never happen to Qi Lin. Furthermore, the mental fortitude of these northern tribes members was not as good as the members of Qi Lin. In the past few years, Qi Lin had gradually formed a standardized system under the leadership of Qin Feng and the others. Every officially selected member had emerged from various desperate situations. He would only become stronger when encountering a strong opponent, and he would only become calmer when facing a dangerous situation instead of going crazy for no reason. Su Qingfeng nodded and said, "That's good. Let's go back too." Helian Peng and Yeluyi were sitting in the middle of the big tent, waiting for news. Yeluyi's sword-like eyebrows furrowed, his heart a little uneasy. Since the start of the battle with the Mahist army, he had always been a little worried about Yi Li's Qi Lin. Although Qi Lin hadn't made any moves, their reputation of never missing a target cast a shadow of uneasiness in his heart. If Helian Peng's Yazi could restrain Qi Lin, he would naturally have less scruples when leading the army into battle. Looking at the sky that was about to brighten, Yeluyi sighed in disappointment and said, "Looks like it's not impossible." Helian Peng's face did not show any anxiety, and said indifferently, "Your Highness does not need to worry, these people's failure is expected. If the Mahist army can't even deal with this small accident, then the Mahist army is too weak. This time, I just want to know how strong the Mahist army's Qi Lin is." Hearing Helian Peng's words, Yeluyi also relaxed. He said, "Helian, it's good that you know. Although Yi Li is a woman, she is not as easy to deal with as Mo Shouyao. Helian, you must be careful." "Oh?" Helian Peng looked at Yeluyi with some surprise. He was surprised that Yeluyi valued Yi Li so much. Even if Yeluyi did not say it, he would definitely not underestimate Yi Li. Yeluyi smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying, "I also only figured it out in the past 2 days. Ren Qining lost to Yi Li. I'm afraid that when Ren Qining first arrived in Glass City, Yi Li had already started scheming. These are all things that Mo Shouyao and Su Qingchen cannot interfere with. Also, when Yi Li defeated Lei Jinting in the northwest, many people say it was an accident. However, there is a saying in the Central Plains that when many accidents are stacked together, they are no longer accidents, but premeditated." Helian Peng nodded in agreement. "Your Highness is right. In the past 2 years, I have also seriously studied the battle where Yi Li defeated Lei Jinting. It was clearly Yi Li deliberately showing weakness, luring Lei Zhenting's army into the hinterland and cutting off his supplies from the rear. She even gave up Xinyang City to destroy the Xiling army's most elite forces. Lei Zhenting's defeat was not unjust. Princess Ding is a woman, but her foresight, scheming, decisiveness, and courage are all perfect. If not for the fact that she is a woman, I'm afraid there would be one more contender for hegemony in the Central Plains. The two of them fell silent. When they thought about the current situation, they could not help but sigh. The Central Plains was truly a land of heroes. If the northern tribes wanted to conquer the Central Plains, the road ahead would be difficult. Reporting to Your Highness, General Helion, the men we sent out last night have returned. Someone reported from outside the tent. Yelu Yi stood up and asked, "How many came back?" The guard outside the tent hesitated for a moment before replying, "Your Highness, only one person came back." One person? Not only Yelu Yi, but even Helion Peng was shocked. Although they had talked about Yazi's defeat tonight, it could be considered a lesson for his arrogant subordinates. But even Helion Peng did not expect that only one person would come back alive. Originally, he had thought that even if these people could not defeat the Mahist army, they would at least be able to escape. "Let him in," Helion Peng said in a low voice. Not long after, a black-clothed man walked in, looking disheveled. He knelt in front of Yelu Yi and Helion Peng. "This subordinate greets Your Highness, General." Helion Peng frowned and asked, "What happened?" The black-clothed man recounted what had happened last night. It turned out that this black-clothed man was the last one to be knocked unconscious by Zhuo Jing in the forest. At that time, Zhuo Jing did not hit him too hard, so it did not take long for him to win. He stumbled out of the forest, and when he returned to the northern tribe's camp, the sky was already bright. Helion Peng and Yelu Ye's expressions turned even uglier. How was this the last one who had escaped? This last one was obviously the Mahist army deliberately letting him go so that he could report back. When the black-clothed man finished speaking, Helion Peng stood up and slashed his sword across the black-clothed man's neck. The black-clothed man's eyes widened, and he fell to the ground, dying with his eyes wide open. He did not die in the hands of the enemy, but in the end, he died in the hands of the person who had trained him. Chapter 853. Helion Peng wiped off the blood on his sword and said coldly, "Since you are the only one left, there is no need to go back." Although he wanted to suppress their arrogance last night, such a crushing defeat was not a lesson for them, it was a complete blow to their morale. If they were allowed to return to Yazi and these things were spread out, it would definitely cause Yazi to have a natural fear of the Mo army and the Qilin, which would be very disadvantageous to the war. There was a saying in the Central Plains that was correct: ignorance is bliss. Your Highness, General Yi, he sent someone to report that his camp was attacked last night. 2 granaries were burned. The soldier outside hurried in and reported. Yelu Ye's face darkened as he gritted his teeth and said, "Qilin." Helion Peng lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, so quick to retaliate, as expected of the Mahist army. Yelu Yi said coldly, "Helion, I don't care what method you use, you must get rid of Qilin for I as soon as possible. Otherwise, they will become a threat to I sooner or later." Compared to the Mahist army, provisions were more important to the northern tribe's army. Even if the Mahist army ran out of provisions, they could still think of ways to get more from other places. The area controlled by the Prince Ding mansion spanned across the original Dechu state and Xiling state. It was not considered small compared to the original Dechu state. Even if it did not include the granaries of Dechu state such as Jiangnan, it was still easy to gather provisions for a few 100,000 soldiers. However, the royal house of the northern tribes was thousands of miles away from Dechu state, and the northern tribes did not produce any provisions. They could only rob the people in the pass. However, when they first entered the pass, they killed more than half of the people in the north. After 2 years, the people in the north could be said to be less than 1 in 10. How could there be so much food for them to rob? Although he had only lost 2 small granaries, it still made Yi flustered and exasperated, and he flew into a thunderous rage. Helian Peng replied, "Seventh Prince, please rest assured. I hope you won't disappoint Yi said in a deep voice. In the Mahist army's camp, Yi couldn't help but smile after hearing Zhuo Jing's report. She said, "This Helian Peng is quite interesting." Mo Xiaoyao snorted unhappily, "What's the point? I don't have that kind of skill to create those things that only know how to do it, but I don't know how to do it. Hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers have already been trained. There was no concept of special operations in this era. Other than Yi Li, there was no one else who could come up with a unique combat direction, combat theory, and training method." In Mo Xiaoyao's opinion, Helian Peng's so-called Yazi might not even be as good as the original shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion. The most important thing was that Helian Peng didn't have a clear idea of what Yazi was used for. Now it seemed like it was purely to go against Qilin. But they were not Qilin's match. This meant that Helian Zhen and Helian Peng had wasted a lot of effort. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Since Helian Peng has this idea, it's clearly aimed at me. Let me deal with this rising general of the northern tribes." Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment before nodding and saying, "That's good. When He Su comes, let him follow you. Also, Yun Ting, Chen Yun, you two should follow Wang Fei." "Yes, Prince." Yun Ting and Chen Yun stepped out of the crowd and bowed in response. Yun Ting had been brought back by Yi Li from the Mahist army under Yonglin Murongshen. Chen Yun admired this young Wang Fei very much. Since Mo Xiaoyao had ordered, the two naturally agreed happily. Yi Li nodded in agreement. The generals below looked at each other and had a deeper understanding of Yi Li's position. He Su was Princess Ding's shadow guard. Now, he had 300,000 soldiers in his hands. Compared to the other old generals of the Prince Ding mansion, he was not lacking at all. This time, he had followed Princess Ding to pacify the north. Prince still had He Su follow Wang Fei. It was clear that he wanted to give He Su and his soldiers to Wang Fei to control. He would become Princess Ding's trusted soldier. What was the most important thing in this world? Naturally, it was military power. Prince could even share military power with Wang Fei. What else could he not give? Right now, the Prince Ding mansion and the northern tribes were in a full-scale war. The entire battlefield stretched from Fei Hong Pass to the Chu capital. The entire battlefront took up more than half of the Dechu state's northern territory. Naturally, it could not be all around one place. The Mahist army was also divided into left, middle, and right. The right army was led by Yi Li and was stationed at Lingjiu Mountain near Fei Hong Pass. The left army was led by Lu Jingxian and was stationed at the city of Brisk, 100 li away from the Chu capital. Mo Xiaoyao was in the middle army, guarding the Mahist army's middle camp. Therefore, Yi Li had just returned from the north and had to leave again after a few days of rest. If Yi Li was willing, she could stay in the camp with Mo Xiaoyao. Even if Yi Li did nothing, the Mahist army would not have any complaints about this Wang Fei. But Yi Li did not want to do that. She did not go to the battlefield to gain the Mahist army's approval. She did it because she liked it. Even after a lifetime, the valiance of being born into a military family had never been erased. So everyone in the world felt that Ding Wang Fei was a scholarly and talented woman on the outside, but her actions were more like a descendant of a general. Outside the Mo family army's barracks, Zhuo Jing, Qin Feng, and the others were standing far away. They were looking at the sky and the earth, but they didn't look at their wise and mighty Prince Ding, who looked down on the world. Lin Han looked at the sky and rubbed his nose. He signaled Qin Feng with his eyes, "Are we leaving or not? It's getting dark." Qin Feng rubbed his nose and rolled his eyes, "How would I know?" Zhuo Jing looked down, "If we can't leave today, we'll leave tomorrow. The prince and Wang Fei are not in a hurry, why should we be?" Feng Zhiyao, who had come to send them off, looked awkwardly at a certain person. He decided that his relationship with Qin Feng and the others was better than his relationship with Princess Ding. Therefore, he should send them off. The four looked at each other expressionlessly, but they were all complaining in their hearts, "What sin did I commit in my past life to be enslaved by this kind of person for half my life? If outsiders saw this, I would lose all my face." On the other side, Yili looked helplessly at a certain person who was looking at her. She sighed, "Xiaoyao, I should go." Mo Xiaoyao said with some bitterness, "Li just came back. Can't she stay with me in the army? I'll let Nanho go to Lingjiu Mountain for a while, okay?" Yili said softly, "We've already agreed on this. You can go back on your words." "I will go back on my words." Mo Xiaoyao said confidently, "I will order Nanho and his son to go to Lingjiu Mountain immediately." Yili looked at the sky and rolled her eyes. What's with this bad habit of acting like a spoiled child for no reason? She had never seen him act so strangely in front of others. "Are you the same age as Mo Xiaobao? Mo Xiaobao doesn't go back on his words like you do. Be good, quickly defeat the northern tribes and everything will be fine." Mo Xiaoyao hugged her in his arms and said gloomily, "Li Li lied to me. After defeating the northern tribes, there's still Lei Zhenting and maybe Mo Jingli. Why won't they die?" Mo Xiaoyao said gloomily as he buried his eyes in Yili's shoulder. Yili sighed softly, "They will die. Stop messing around. I should go." Chapter 854. After much persuasion, Mo Xiaoyao finally let go of Yili. His expression was dark as he watched her get on the horse and leave. Standing at the side, Feng Xiao couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. "Prince, it's not the first time Wang Fei has gone out. Is there a need to be so reluctant to part? Most importantly, you can change your image so casually. Not to mention your subordinates, even I, who grew up with you, find it hard to accept." "Humph. If you have the time to joke around, why don't you hurry up and kill Yelu Yi for this king?" Mo Xiaoyao indifferently glanced at Feng Xiao, snorted coldly, and left with a flick of his sleeve. There was no trace of the harmless appearance he had in front of Yili. Feng Xiao snorted. He held his chest and helplessly shook his head with a bitter smile. He really valued love over friendship. Even if he was angry, he didn't need to vent it on an innocent passerby like him. If you didn't want Wang Fei to leave, you shouldn't have agreed in the beginning. Feng Xiao cursed silently in his heart, but he could only follow helplessly. Who told him to be so unlucky to have made such a careless friend? Yi Li's group left the Mahist army's camp and quickly rode to the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp. This was not only the closest place to Feihong Pass, but also the closest place to the area controlled by Lei Zhenting. Lei Zhenting had hundreds of thousands of soldiers at the border. Even though West Hill was very busy right now, no one knew if Lei Zhenting would intervene when the Mahist army and the northern tribes were fighting fiercely. The reason why Yi Li was personally stationed here was to prepare for any accidents that might happen. Spirit Vulture Mountain was more than 200 li from the Mahist army's camp. Even if Yi Li's group rode fast, they would only arrive at night. However, there were people guarding the camp, and old General Yuan Pei was at Feihong Pass, so Yi Li and the others were not in a hurry. The group of people rode on their horses, heading towards Spirit Vulture Mountain at a leisurely pace. When they reached a mountain stream, Qin Feng took the lead and pulled on the reins. The galloping horse was suddenly pulled by the reins. The horse neighed and reared up on its hind legs. It circled around in place for a few steps before coming to a stop. Yi Li and the others who were following behind him naturally stopped as well. "Who are you? Please show yourself," Qin Feng said loudly, his voice echoing strangely in the mountain stream. "Oh, Princess Ding, I've heard a lot about you. Now that I've met you today, you really do live up to your reputation." On the mountain road in front of them, a young man wearing a battle robe and holding a long saber appeared. He had a vigorous aura around him. He laughed heartily as he cupped his hands in greeting towards Yi Li. Yi Li frowned slightly. She patted her horse forward and smiled indifferently. "General Helian, nice to meet you." The smile on Helian Peng's face faded slightly. Princess Ding has good eyesight. Yili smiled faintly. Who else but General Helion would dare to lead troops to block the road under the control of my Mahist army? Did General Helion also bring your Yazi today? Helion Peng's eyelids twitched when he heard Yili's words. Last time, he had underestimated the strength of the Mahist army, causing the people he sent out to be completely wiped out. Although he had only sent out a few dozen people to test the waters, it wasn't a glorious battle record to have them completely wiped out. He said in a low voice, "This one did indeed bring Yazi here. However, it seems that Princess Consort didn't bring Qi Lin with her. It's really regrettable. Does Princess Consort think that this place is under the control of the Mahist army and that there isn't the slightest bit of danger to run amok? How would this consort dare to have such thoughts? Even if I'm sitting at home, trouble will still come knocking. However, this consort can't possibly not even leave the house because of this, right? Wouldn't that be like giving up eating for fear of choking?" Yili said with a smile. Helion Peng looked thoughtfully at the white-clothed woman in front of him. Compared to the women of the northern tribes, the women of the Central Plains didn't look old. If she was in the northern tribes, Yili would look like she was only 17 or 18 years old. She was dressed in simple snow-white clothes and her black hair was casually tied up. Her snow-white clothes fluttered in the wind and her hair danced in the wind. She looked like the legendary snow goddess. Since this one is here, I would like to invite Princess Consort to the northern tribes as a guest. I hope Princess Consort will do me the honor," Helion Peng said in a low voice. Hearing this, Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and the others looked at Helion Peng with even more sinister and fierce gazes. Several people patted their horses and stepped forward to block Yili. When Helion Peng saw this, he didn't care. He laughed and waved his hand. A group of black-clothed people appeared on the mountain path. At a glance, there were more than 100 people. Helion Peng looked at Yili and said seriously, "I hope Princess Consort will do me the honor." Qin Feng laughed coldly and said, "You want to take Princess Consort away with just these few people? Your Excellency is too arrogant." "Oh?" Helion Peng raised his eyebrows and glanced at Qin Feng and the others. "May I ask who these people are?" Naturally, he could tell that the aura of Qin Feng and the others were definitely not as simple as ordinary guards. It was a pity that the intelligence of the northern tribes was not as accurate as the Mahist army. They couldn't even recognize the few people that Yili trusted the most. Qin Feng said lightly, "General Helion doesn't have to worry about nameless people. However, if General Helion wants to invite Princess Consort over as a guest, you have to ask me first." Helion Peng grinned and said, "Is that so? If that's the case, go." The men in black behind him received the order and immediately surrounded Yili and the others. Qin Feng, Lin Han and the others charged forward, while Zhuo Jing retreated to Yili's side and didn't make a move. The people that Yili brought out, including Qin Feng, Yun Ting, Chen Yun and the others, were only slightly more than 10 people. It was naturally difficult for them to fight against the hundreds of people under Helion Peng. However, these people were the best of the best. They were able to hold their own against so many people and did not fall into a disadvantageous position. Seeing this, even Helion Peng couldn't help but change his expression. He didn't know if these people were specially sent by Imo Xiaoyao to protect Yili or if the Mahist army's fighting strength was so strong. If it was the latter, the northern tribes' army's ending would be worrying. As expected of the elites of the Mahist army, their skills are extraordinary. Helion Peng praised loudly, "Princess Consort, no matter how strong your people are, I'm afraid they won't be able to defend against so many people. Why let your subordinates sacrifice themselves? This one is sincerely inviting Princess Consort to the northern tribes as a guest. Why won't Princess Consort give me face?" Helion Peng's appearance wasn't considered handsome, but he had a valiant aura that was rarely seen in men of the Central Plains. However, he spoke such cultured words that gave people a strange feeling of incongruity. Yili smiled faintly and said, "General Helion seems to be very interested in this consort's Qi Lin." Helion Peng raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "I'm ashamed to say this, but this one is very interested. Princess Consort was able to train such a mysterious troop that is even stronger than the Mahist army's trump card, the Black Cloud Cavalry. How can this one not be impressed? I wanted to ask Princess Consort for advice. Yili nodded and said, since it's like this, then this consort will tell you, Qi-Lin, how to use it. Before he could finish his sentence, Yili waved her hand and a sharp whistling sound pierced through the air. A green flash shot into the sky and instantly bloomed into green fireworks in the sky. A moment later, a few places not far away also lit up with dark green flames. Chapter 855. Helian Peng's face darkened and he said coldly, why is there Qi-Lin here? Did Princess Consort predict that I would be waiting here? The two fireworks were obviously the Mahist army responding to Yi Li's summons. The one who would do this was most likely Qi-Lin. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, General, do you really think that I can predict things? Qi-Lin's function is to be everywhere at any time. This is a battlefield. How can they be absent? Helian Peng laughed coldly. Compared to Qi-Lin, his subordinate Yi was indeed not as good. But it didn't matter. Then Princess Consort, why don't you see if they can save you in time? Helian Peng flew up and pounced towards Yi Li. What was surprising was that Helian Peng was not like the other northern tribespeople who only focused on external martial arts. On the contrary, he also practiced internal martial arts of the Central Plains and it seemed that his internal martial arts were not shallow. At least, Yi Li could not see the depth of his internal martial arts. Zhuo Jing, who was beside Yi Li, leaped up and flew towards him. The two of them exchanged blows in the air. In a flash, they had exchanged more than 10 blows before both of them landed on the ground. Zhuo Jing's face darkened. Helian Peng's martial arts were beyond his expectations. If it was under normal circumstances, he would have a chance of winning if he teamed up with Qin Feng and Lin Han. But now, it was impossible. Helian Peng was very confident in his own martial arts. He had fought with the Mahist army several times before and had not met a worthy opponent, even though Mo Xiaoyao did not make a move. He did not expect that he would be stopped by an inconspicuous bodyguard. Helian Peng laughed coldly and praised, good martial arts. Zhuo Jing was silent and stared calmly at Helian Peng. Helian Peng snorted and laughed, unfortunately, it's still not enough. He ignored Zhuo Jing and once again pounced towards Yi Li. How could Zhuo Jing let him succeed? He flew up to block him. On the other side, Yi Li had also jumped down from her horse's back at the same time. The dagger in her hand flashed, and stabbed towards Helian Peng's chest. Helian Peng exclaimed in surprise. He raised his hand to grab Yi Li's wrist. However, he saw Yi Li turn her wrist and slash at his wrist. In just a split second, Helian Peng clearly saw the dagger in Yi Li's hand. It wasn't an ordinary dagger, but a tri-chested sharp awl. There was even a blood groove on it. If one was pierced by it, even if they didn't die, they would lose half their life. Helian Peng retreated and said with a smile, Princess Ding is really ruthless. Although Yi Li was a woman, she was not afraid of anyone when it came to close combat. It was just that he started cultivating his inner strength too late, so he couldn't achieve great success in it. Now that they were engaged in close combat, there wasn't much use of internal energy. Although Helian Peng was powerful, he was still far from being able to control his inner strength as he wished. Zhuo Jing naturally wouldn't let Yi Li fight alone. He flew up with a long sword, which was extremely sharp. The sword's aura was overwhelming. The two of them, one from afar and the other from close combat, cooperated well. For a moment, Helian Peng couldn't do anything. Helian Peng knew that if he wanted to capture Yi Li, he had to get rid of Zhuo Jing first. However, with Yi Li here, he couldn't free himself to get rid of Zhuo Jing. Zhuo Jing wasn't a good-for-nothing who could be easily defeated by him. Therefore, he could only focus on attacking Yi Li. As long as he hurt Yi Li first, he would naturally be free to get rid of Zhuo Jing. After making up his mind, Helian Peng unsheathed the long sword in his hand. He waved the sword and distanced himself from Yi Li. The long sword danced vigorously in the air, heading towards Yi Li. Yi Li knew that her strength was far inferior to Helian Peng's. She didn't welcome the attack and retreated. Zhuo Jing moved forward to block Helian Peng's long sword. Yi Li appeared behind him and stabbed the short sword in her hand towards Helian Peng. Helian Peng had been waiting for this moment. He waved the long sword in his hand with all his strength. Even Zhuo Jing was shaken off by the strong aura of his sword. However, Yi Li, who should have been more seriously injured than Zhuo Jing, seemed to ignore the sword aura and continued to advance towards Helian Peng. Yi Li's movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the short sword in her hand had stabbed into Helian Peng's body. Helian Peng didn't have time to be surprised at how Yi Li could resist his strength. His face was already distorted by the intense pain in his body. Zhuo Jing, who had retreated to one side, waved the long whip in his hand and pulled Yi Li back. Helian Peng steadied himself. When he saw the wounds on his body, he gasped. Although he had dodged a few of them quickly, the broken sword had only pierced through his arm. However, it could be predicted that this arm would not be able to move for the next 2 to 3 months. If it had really pierced his body, even if it had not hit a vital part, he was afraid that no matter how strong his internal energy was, only death would await him. Princess Consort, you have good skills. Helian Peng stared at Yi Li, his expression changing. Yi Li's expression was calm as she said lightly, General Helian, you flatter me. Generals' martial arts are extremely rare among the people of the northern tribes. Helian Peng did not hide it. He smiled and said, that's right. This one's martial arts were indeed taught by an expert from the Central Plains. Helian Peng casually pulled out a long cloth and wrapped the bleeding wound as he spoke with a smile. It's not just an expert. This consort knows a few experts from the Central Plains. Helian Peng smiled and said, I am ashamed to say this. My master just happened to die at the hands of Prince Ding. Yi Li frowned slightly and muttered to herself for a moment, Murong Xiong. Died at the hands of Imo Xiaoyao. Only Murong Xiong would be able to teach such an expert. Moreover, Helian Peng's martial arts were indeed somewhat similar to Murong Xiong's. Helian Peng smiled but did not say anything. He neither admitted nor denied it. Yi Li did not mind and said lightly, General Helian, it's best if you quickly return. Bleeding from an arm can still cause death. Although Helian Peng had bandaged the wound on his arm, it clearly could not stop the bleeding. Not long after, the entire cloth was dyed blood red. Helian Peng laughed bitterly and raised his hand to seal a few more acupuncture points. Just as he was about to speak, he saw a few cold lights flash through the forest in the distance. Several feathered arrows shot towards them. Not far from him, several men in black fell to the ground after being hit by the arrows. Helian Peng's expression changed, they came so quickly. Retreat! Chapter 856. When Helian Peng saw that Qi Lin had arrived and that he was heavily injured, he knew that he would not be able to gain any advantage today. After saying that he was going to retreat, he flew away from the mountain stream, not caring about the lives of the people he brought with him. With the addition of the Qilin, these people were naturally taken care of by everyone without much effort. Qin Feng looked in the direction that Helian Peng left and said regretfully, it's a pity that Helian Peng escaped. Lin Han, who was following behind him, looked at the dead or injured northern tribe soldiers and said, Helian Peng is really ruthless. He sent so many people to their deaths just like that. Helian Peng did not feel any heartache when he threw away the dozens of people from a few days ago and the 100 people today. These people were different from the normal northern tribe soldiers. Every one of them had been specially trained for a long time. Even Helian Peng did not have many such experts. From this, it could be seen that Yi Li and Helian Peng treated their subordinates differently. Qi Lin had been established for many years and the number of casualties was only slightly more than 100. However, Helian Peng could easily kill more than 100 people with just 1 or 2 moves. It was obvious that Helian Peng did not treat these people as his elite trump cards or even his own subordinates. At most, they were just some high-level cannon fodder. Zhuo Jing was the closest and saw the situation clearly. He said in a low voice, even if we did not kill him, Helian Peng would not be able to jump around for a month or 2. Wang Fei, do you want to send someone? Yi Li shook her head and said, Helian Peng's martial arts are not weak. Even if he is not as good as the prince, he should not be weaker than Ren Qining. Furthermore, he is the general of the northern tribes. Now that he is injured, there should be guards around him. There is no need to send people to their deaths. Let's go to Spirit Vulture Mountain first. Yes, princess. Everyone replied. Some people were left to clean up the battlefield while the rest escorted Yi Li to Spirit Vulture Mountain. The news of Yi Li being blocked by Helian Peng naturally couldn't be hidden from Mo Xiaoyao. Although Yi Li wasn't injured, Mo Xiaoyao's expression was extremely ugly. Even Feng Xiao and Han Mingxi, who were usually the most talkative, didn't dare to open their mouths so as to avoid provoking Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao snorted with a gloomy expression. He picked up his incineration sword and left the camp. Seeing this, Feng Xiao and the others were stunned. After a long while, Han Mingxi asked somewhat blankly, What is he going to do? Feng Xiao blinked his eyes and joked, You're not going to kill Helian Peng, right? Han Mingyue, who was sitting beside Han Mingxi, nodded and said, He is indeed going to kill Helian Peng. Who knows, Yelu Yi and Helian Jin might also be there. Although Feng Xiao didn't trust Han Mingyue for a long time, he still had some confidence in his ability and scheming. If it wasn't for Su Zuidi, why would Han Mingyue be like this? Hearing him say this, Feng Xiao immediately jumped up and exclaimed, Is he crazy? That is an army of hundreds of thousands. If he alone can slaughter the entire northern tribe's army, then what is the point of fighting? There is a limit to a person's strength. Even if Mo Xiaoyao's martial arts were the best in the world, able to fight against 10, 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000, 1 against 10,000, 1 against 10,000. If he wanted to charge into the army camp and kill Helian Peng and Yelu Yi, Feng Xiao only had 2 words for him, You're courting death. After a moment of shock, Feng Xiao finally jumped up and rushed out while shouting, Mo Xiaoyao, I owe you in my past life. Men! Gather the men! In the large tent, only Han Mingxi and Han Mingyue, the 2 brothers, were left. Han Mingxi looked at Han Mingyue and asked in disbelief, Big brother, does Mo Xiaoyao really plan to kill Helian Peng? Even if he wanted to kill him, there was no need to charge into the northern tribe's camp. He could find an opportunity to wait until Helian Peng was alone or out of the camp. With Mo Xiaoyao's martial arts, he could kill several Helian Pengs. Han Mingyue smiled bitterly and said, How could Prince Ding not think of what you can think of? Han Mingxi didn't understand, then why is he doing this? After today, as long as Mo Xiaoyao doesn't die, I'm afraid that no one in this world will dare to have designs on Yi Li, Han Mingyue sighed. He had once thought that Mo Xiaoyao was deeply in love with Su Zuidi, and even secretly thought that Mo Xiaoyao didn't understand love. Only now did he understand that it wasn't that Mo Xiaoyao didn't understand love, it was just that he hadn't met the right person. What Mo Xiaoyao did for Yi Li, Han Mingyue admitted that he couldn't do it. Reaching out to pat his somewhat absent-minded brother, Han Mingyue turned and walked out. Inside the tent, Han Mingxi was silent for a long time. Finally, he smiled bitterly and a trace of relief flashed across his face. What Mo Xiaoyao could do, he would never be able to do. It wasn't about ability, it was about temperament. He would never be able to do such a thing for a person, even if he loved her. This day could be said to be an unforgettable day for all the northern tribe's soldiers. Of course, that was if they had eternal life. Because the 2 armies didn't engage in battle these few days, the northern tribe's camp had a rare moment of peace. However, it was precisely in this type of calm that the soldiers guarding the entrance to the camp watched as a silver-haired man dressed in snow-white clothes drifted over like a white cloud. Before the soldiers at the door could react to this sudden scene, they only felt a light on their necks. The man in white's cold, scarlet eyes was the last thing they saw in this world. Mo Xiaoyao barged into the camp, taking advantage of the fact that the northern tribe's soldiers had yet to react. He rushed towards the general's tent. His qinggong was extremely high, and along the way, the sword qi of the incineration sword scattered, causing countless casualties. Even the unlucky ones who became his stepping stones were shaken to death by the force of his footsteps. Instantly, the camp was in chaos. Countless soldiers rushed towards Mo Xiaoyao. The soldiers who reacted quickly shot arrows at him, but how could normal arrows hit Mo Xiaoyao? Furthermore, it was fine if he was in the air, but once he landed on the ground, it was hard to say if the arrows would hit Mo Xiaoyao or their own men. In a moment, the white-robed figure flashed in and out of the camp. Everywhere he went, blood flowed like a river. No one was lucky enough to survive the incineration sword. Every time he swung his sword, blood would flow. With such power, even the northern tribe's soldiers who were known for their bravery couldn't help but feel terrified. They were afraid that if they were careless, they would die without a doubt. With such a huge commotion in the camp, how could Yeluyi, who was sitting in the commander's tent, not know? Yeluyi was furious that Heli and Peng had returned with injuries, but when he heard the commotion outside the camp, he couldn't help but be enraged. Just then, the soldiers outside panicked and reported that someone had barged into the camp. Yeluyi laughed coldly. I would like to see who dares to barge into the northern tribe's camp. The moment he brought Helian Zhen and Helian Peng out, he saw Mo Xiaoyao, dressed in white and holding a sword, walking over. That dull ancient sword was glowing with a bloody light, its killing intent soaring to the heavens. Mo Xiaoyao. Yeluyi was shocked and angry. He couldn't understand why this fiend would come to the northern tribe's camp at this time. Could it be that Mo Xiaoyao suddenly felt that as long as he killed him, he would be able to resolve this battle? Chapter 857. Anyone with a little experience would know that a war between countries was not something that could be resolved with the death of one or two commanders. Moreover, how difficult was it to assassinate the commander of an army? Even if Mo Xiaoyao killed him, how could Yeluyi guarantee that he would be able to leave alive? Mo Xiaoyao, who was in the midst of killing, also saw Yeluyi and the other two. With a cold smile, he waved his sword and charged towards Yeluyi. Looking at the blood-colored sword, Yeluyi's expression changed. Sword of incineration. Beside him, Helian Zhen's face had already turned black. If Mo Xiaoyao managed to escape after charging into the northern tribe's camp alone, the northern tribes would be in deep trouble. With a cold snort, Helian Zhen brandished the long saber in his hand and charged towards Mo Xiaoyao. Yeluyi had the same idea as Helian Zhen. Seeing Helian Zhen make a move, he also charged forward without hesitation. Since Mo Xiaoyao had come here himself, if they could kill him, it would be a good thing for the northern tribes. More importantly, if they could kill Mo Xiaoyao, their status in the royal house of the northern tribes could be said to be unshakable. Mo Xiaoyao, you've got guts, you're really arrogant. Yeluyi said coldly. Seeing the two attacking, Mo Xiaoyao did not reply, only smiling coldly. The sword in his hand cut through the air like a ray of light, emitting a cold sword aura. Helian Peng was already injured, but at this time he stood to the side and watched. When he saw Helian Zhen and Yeluyi fighting Mo Xiaoyao, he knew that the two of them had no chance of winning. Mo Xiaoyao's martial arts were too weak compared to the two of them. Not to mention competing, the two of them did not even have the qualifications to be mentioned in the same breath as him. Lowering his head to look at the wound on his arm, he thought of the beautiful white-clothed girl who looked like a snow mountain saintess. A trace of coldness flashed through Helian Peng's eyes. He raised his hand to summon the guard beside him and whispered a few words. The guard nodded and turned to leave. Watching Helian Zhen and Yeluyi struggling under his sword, Mo Xiaoyao revealed a mocking smile. He turned his gaze to Helian Zhen and swung his sword without hesitation. This sword strike did not have the slightest intention of showing any mercy. When Helian Zhen saw the earth-shattering energy, He knew that it was not something he could withstand. But Emo Xiaoyao gave up on Yelu Yi and only targeted him. He had nowhere to hide. He could only use all his strength to raise his saber to block Emo Xiaoyao's sword. With a loud bang, the long saber that was made of fine iron and weighed over 100 kilograms shattered into pieces. The incineration sword in Emo Xiaoyao's hand did not slow down in the slightest as it continued to slash towards Helianzhen's head. Helianzhen was a famous general of the northern tribes. 18 years ago, he had been defeated by Emo Xiaoyao. 18 years later, he had finally regrouped with great difficulty and wanted to make a comeback. But before he could achieve anything, he was about to become a ghost under Emo Xiaoyao's sword. Seeing Helianzhen's suddenly widened eyes filled with fear and shock, Emo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed with a cold and bloodthirsty smile. Die! Bang! It seemed very slow, but in reality, it happened in the blink of an eye. The other saber blocked Emo Xiaoyao's thunderous sword strike. Helianzhen was also grabbed by Yelu Yi and pulled to the side. Although they avoided death, everyone present was still in a state of shock. They saw Helianpeng holding a large saber that glowed with a faint golden light. But at this time, the saber had already been broken into two halves. Helianpeng's hand holding the saber was trembling uncontrollably. Even the wound on his other arm that was originally bandaged was once again frozen and cracked. It was clear that in order to save Helianzhen, he had used all his strength to block the attack. The surging internal energy in his body had actually caused his wound to reopen. Emo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes, his expression indifferent as he looked at the incineration sword in his hand. After a while, he raised his head to look at Helianpeng and said, "Good martial arts." Murong Xiong's disciple? If Helianpeng did not say it, Yili would not have been able to see through Helianpeng's background. But Emo Xiaoyao had only exchanged blows with Helianpeng once, and he had clearly seen through his martial arts. He sneered, "It seems that killing Murong Xiong at that time was not an injustice?" Helianpeng was clearly not interested in the fact that Emo Xiaoyao was his enemy who had killed his master. He gripped the short saber in his hand and said in a low voice, "Not as good as Prince Ding." What does Prince Ding mean by today's actions? What do I mean? Emo Xiaoyao's smile was somewhat strange as he looked at him and said, "You guys don't know what I mean?" Yelu Yi let go of Helianzhen's hand and stood beside Helianpeng, saying in a low voice, "Emo Xiaoyao, don't think that just because your martial arts are strong that I am afraid of you. This prince doesn't believe that you alone can do anything to this prince in the midst of an army of 10,000. Emo Xiaoyao sneered and said, "If you don't know, then I'll tell you. Anyone who dares to have any ideas about Li will all die." The incineration sword released a dangerous brilliance. Emo Xiaoyao casually waved it, and the flags in the camp not far away fell to the ground. The muscles at the corner of Helianpeng's eyes twitched. He casually wiped off the trace of blood from the corner of his lips and sneered. "I would like to see just how formidable Prince Ding is." With a wave of his hand, countless black-clothed men surged out from every corner of the camp and charged towards Emo Xiaoyao. These people were all personally trained by Helianpeng, and their skills were not too far off from Qilin. The northern tribes people were naturally bloodthirsty. At this time, the entire camp was being slaughtered by Emo Xiaoyao, and blood flowed like a river. This aroused the killing intent in their hearts. One by one, they charged towards Emo Xiaoyao without hesitation. They were truly unafraid of death. Emo Xiaoyao let out a long whistle, and his white-clothed figure turned into a white ray of light as he shot towards the crowd. Everywhere he went, blood splattered everywhere, and countless broken limbs were left behind. Although Yazi had temporarily trapped Emo Xiaoyao, the expressions of Helianzhen, Yelu Yi, and the others, who were watching the battle from the side, were even more unsightly. Helianzhen had already lost a lot of blood, and just now, he had suffered internal injuries from Emo Xiaoyao. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with gloominess. Although Helianpeng didn't cherish these specially trained subordinates as much as Yili did, these people were still different from ordinary soldiers. Even Helianpeng only had a little over 1,000 people under his command. Previously, because of Yi Li, he had lost over 100 people. At the very least, he had managed to find out some information about Yi Li. But now, in the blink of an eye, close to 100 people had been killed by Emo Xiaoyao. How could Helian Peng's expression not be ugly? Helian Zhen said with a cold expression, "No matter what, we cannot let Emo Xiaoyao leave this place today." The threat that Emo Xiaoyao gave him was too great. If it was said that Emo Xiaoyao, who was still a teenager 18 years ago, made him feel that his failure was only because he was too careless and unreconciled, then today's meeting completely overturned Helian Zhen's thoughts. The current Emo Xiaoyao was definitely not someone he could deal with. Just now, he had only been a hair's breadth away from death. Even 18 years ago, he had not felt such a feeling of death. Since he could not defeat Emo Xiaoyao, then he had to kill him by hook or by crook. The northern tribe's soldiers who were watching from the side were also shocked by the bloody scene. The current scene was even more impactful than on the battlefield. On the battlefield, everyone was fighting with their lives on the line. No matter how desperate the situation was, no one had the time to care about it. But now, they could only watch on helplessly, as this could be called a one-sided massacre. Those black-clothed men, who were usually very powerful in the eyes of these ordinary soldiers, were like wooden chickens and pottery dogs in front of this white-clothed, white-haired man, unable to withstand a single blow. The snowy rain fell on Emo Xiaoyao's snow-white clothes, adding a hint of killing intent to his cold and bloodthirsty handsome face. It was as if he was a blood-soaked Azura from hell. Chapter 858. Ah! Kill this devil! Finally, someone couldn't help but break down. Without caring about anything else, he raised his weapon and charged at the blood-stained white figure. Unfortunately, before he could even touch a corner of the other's clothes, he was cut in half by the incoming sword chi. "Archers, shoot!" Yelu Yi ordered in a deep voice. These black-clothed Yazi might be able to trap Emo Xiaoyao, or even exhaust his internal energy to kill him. But that was under the premise that Emo Xiaoyao didn't want to escape. More importantly, even if Emo Xiaoyao didn't escape, who knew how many Yazi would have to die to exhaust Emo Xiaoyao's internal energy? Perhaps it would take 2,000 or 3,000. They didn't have that many people. Once the last black-clothed man died, it would be their turn to test the incineration sword's edge. In an instant, arrows rained down like rain. Although most of the arrows were aimed at Emo Xiaoyao, many of the black-clothed men were too close to Emo Xiaoyao. Moreover, Emo Xiaoyao's figure was erratic. In fact, he was shooting indiscriminately. Emo Xiaoyao sneered. He grabbed a black-clothed man and casually tossed him aside. In an instant, he turned into a hedgehog. Turning around, he swung his sword. The arrows in the distance seemed to be blocked by something, and they all flew back to the person who originally shot them. "Yelu Yi, you're courting death," Emo Xiaoyao said in a deep voice. "Protect the seventh prince." Everyone was shocked. Dozens of people rushed to Yelu Ye's front and back to block Emo Xiaoyao's furious sword strike. Of the dozens of people who blocked the sword, only 3 or 4 remained to protect Yelu Yi. Fortunately, Emo Xiaoyao's attention was quickly drawn back by the arrows coming from behind. Otherwise, Yelu Ye's life would be in danger. Although he managed to keep his life, Yelu Ye's complexion was pale. Looking at Helian Zhen, who had just escaped a calamity like him, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of a bleak and bitter smile. He didn't dare to carelessly issue orders again. Emo Xiaoyao's martial arts, just how high is it? Looking at the white-haired man in white, Yelu Yi couldn't help muttering to himself. Helian Peng clutched his wound and leaned against the entrance of the large tent. Not only did the bleeding wound cause his face to turn pale, it also caused him to feel faint. The current Emo Xiaoyao can probably be considered the #1 expert under the heavens. More than 2 years ago, he had to join forces with Lei Jinting and Ling Taihan to kill my master. If it was now, I'm afraid even if my master was at his peak, he might not be a match for him. Some people were called geniuses. They didn't seem to need to train hard or sharpen their skills. They were born to stand higher than others. Even the heavens couldn't help but be jealous of such a genius. And Imo Xiaoyao was obviously such a person. Just as the entire northern militant camp was trembling in fear from Imo Xiaoyao's massacre, a commotion came from outside the main gate. Two figures, one red and one white, flew in from outside, like two shadows pouncing in the direction of Imo Xiaoyao. Imo Xiaoyao. Feng Zhiyao's voice was flustered and exasperated. It was fortunate that he had spoken first. Otherwise, he would most likely have suffered two swords like those black-clothed men of the northern militant camp who had been ravaged by Imo Xiaoyao. Imo Xiaoyao kept his sword and glanced unhappily at Feng Zhiyao and Han Mingyue who had landed in front of him. He said, "Who asked you to be so nosy?" Han Mingyue smiled but didn't say anything. He was only following Feng Zhiyao to help. He also knew that Imo Xiaoyao wouldn't appreciate his help, so he didn't say anything. Feng Zhiyao was so angry that his hair stood on end. He grabbed Imo Xiaoyao and said, "Why aren't you leaving? Do you want to die here?" Under normal circumstances, Feng Zhiyao definitely wouldn't be able to catch Imo Xiaoyao. However, after Imo Xiaoyao's massacre, the anger and brutality in his heart had dissipated. Instead, he felt slightly tired. Even if Imo Xiaoyao was the #1 martial arts expert in the world, the number of northern militant fighters who had died at his hands today was no less than 100. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be completely exhausted. He only wanted to vent his anger on the northern militant and give them a warning. He didn't plan to throw his life away. Even if Feng Zhiyao and Han Mingyue didn't come, he would have to leave in a while. Now that he was being held back by Feng Zhiyao, he didn't stay any longer. He glanced disdainfully at Ye Luyi and said, "Let's go." He took the lead and used his qinggong to rush out of the gate. Imo Xiaoyao. Ye Luyi was enraged by that look of disdain. He roared, "Kill him!" Han Mingyue, who was at the end of the group, sighed helplessly. She swung her sword to deflect the arrow that was shot at her, and leaped up to fly outside. Feng Zhiyao dared to charge into the northern militant camp with Han Mingyue. Naturally, he wouldn't be unprepared. The three of them were still chased by the northern militant army after they left the camp. But after chasing for less than 2 to 3 li, they saw the Mahist army's Black Cloud cavalry waiting for them. Imo Xiaoyao and the other two landed in the midst of the Mahist army and turned to face the northern militant army. The two armies faced each other. Imo Xiaoyao, "One day, I will make you die a horrible death." Looking at Imo Xiaoyao who was sitting on a horse, his white clothes stained with blood, Ye Luyi roared. Imo Xiaoyao snorted and pointed his sword at Ye Luyi. He laughed coldly, "This is what I wanted to say to you. Today, I will teach you a lesson. If there is a next time, I will definitely take your dog life. Return to camp." Watching Imo Xiaoyao leisurely leave under the escort of the Mo family troops, Ye Luyi's face turned ashen. "Go back." Ye Luyi and the rest returned to the camp. Imo Xiaoyao's ruckus today had caused the northern militant camp to lose more than 200 ordinary soldiers. Helian Zhen and Helian Peng's specially trained Yazi had more than 400 to 500 casualties. The incineration sword could cut through metal like mud. Not to mention the vital parts, even the sword's aura would cause severe injuries. Those injured soldiers were no different from dead. They would never be able to return to the battlefield again. This was not the worst thing. After all, compared to the millions of soldiers, the loss of a few hundred soldiers was negligible. But the psychological trauma this massacre had on the northern militant soldiers was the most serious thing. With just Prince Ding alone, he was able to move about unhindered amidst the several 100,000 soldiers' campsite, killing until blood flowed like a river. This caused the northern militant soldiers, who were already worried about the reputation of the Mahist army, to be even more fearful of Prince Ding. Seventh Highness. In the tent, Helian Peng knelt on the ground. Due to his heavy injuries, he had not been able to rest properly. This caused his resolute face to look haggard and weak. Ye Luyi stared coldly at him and said, "What do you have to say?" Today's incident was caused by Helian Peng going to deal with Yili. Yi originally did not agree with Helian Peng's actions. It was not that he did not want to deal with Yili, but Yili was Princess Ding. There would definitely be countless experts protecting her. The chances of success were too low. What's more, the fate of those who had once attacked Yili was still there. As expected, Helian Peng's plan had failed. Instead, it attracted Emo Xiaoyao's crazy revenge. This time, what they lost was not the lives of the few hundred soldiers, but the morale of the northern militant army. In such a situation, they would not be able to recover without a few shocking victories. Helian Peng was silent. He lowered his head and said, "I have nothing to say. Please punish me." Chapter 859. Yi stared at Helian Peng for a long time, then sighed, "Forget it, you're also injured, get up. Let's talk about this after you've recovered." Although Yi was very unhappy because of Helian Peng, he would not cut off his own arm at this time. He waved his hand to signal Helian Peng to get up. Helian Peng thanked him and stood up. Yi looked at Helian Zhen sitting on the side and asked, "Uncle, what do you think?" Helian Zhen had been silent since he came back. Seeing Yi ask him, he sighed and said, "I didn't expect Emo Xiaoyao to change so much in just a short 10 years. Your Highness, if Emo Xiaoyao is not eliminated, he will become a great threat to the northern tribes." Yi frowned and said, "Uncle is right. However, there are countless people who want to get rid of Emo Xiaoyao, but who has ever succeeded? The Emo Xiaoyao today is not the Emo Xiaoyao of the past. In the past, the Prince Ding mansion was restrained by the Dechu state's royal family, so they had a chance to deal a fatal blow to the Prince Ding mansion. Unfortunately, the snake did not die, which allowed Emo Xiaoyao to grow into the northern tribe's biggest enemy. Now, the Prince Ding mansion was separated from the Dechu state, and Emo Xiaoyao had the final say. Moreover, the Prince Ding mansion was of the same mind, so there was no weakness. Helian Zhen looked down and said, "Today, Prince Ding's only weakness is Princess Ding." "Uncle." "Absolutely not," Yi said sternly. Helian Zhen was stunned, looking at Yi in confusion. Yi smiled helplessly and said, "Uncle, don't you understand what happened today? In the future, you don't have to think about Yili unless Emo Xiaoyao is dead. No one can touch Yili." Emo Xiaoyao's actions today clearly told everyone that if anyone dared to touch Yili, he would kill them even if he had to die. Fortunately, today's matter could be considered as a warning. If Emo Xiaoyao really decided to kill them today, even if Emo Xiaoyao died of exhaustion in the end, the three of them would not be able to escape before he died. People in power always said that they would do whatever it took, but this did not include themselves. Now that they were dead, so what if they killed Emo Xiaoyao? So what if they destroyed the Prince Ding mansion? Wasn't it someone else who would benefit from it? Helian Zhen pondered for a while, and finally, he sighed and said, "I didn't expect that the Prince Ding mansion would have such a romantic." Helian Peng stood up and said to Yi, "Your Highness, this general requests permission to go to the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp." Yi frowned and said, "You still want to deal with Yili?" Helian Peng said, "I won't make a move against Princess Ding again. However, Princess Ding is currently overseeing the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp, and our army also needs someone to guard it. Princess Ding is resourceful. I'm afraid that the people stationed there are." Yi thought for a while, then nodded and said, "That's good, you can go after you've recovered. Don't provoke Yili again." In the end, Yi couldn't help but warn him. Helian Peng nodded and said, "I understand, my injuries aren't serious, I can set out tomorrow. You can go." Yi waved his hand and said no more. In the Mo family army's camp, young Master Feng San's aura was imposing. His handsome face was filled with anger as he glared at a certain someone who was slowly bandaging her wound. The harsh words that came out of his mouth were so harsh that if an ordinary person heard it, they would be so ashamed that they would slit their own throats and commit suicide in order to escape. But Prince Ding, who had just finished a massacre, was clearly in a very good mood, not taking young Master Feng San's curses seriously at all. He didn't need anyone's help, he just casually grabbed a cloth to bandage the wound on his arm. As for the other small injuries, he simply didn't care. Feng San, when did you become an old woman? Aren't you tired of nagging? After bandaging his wound, Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyes and glanced at young Master Feng San, indifferently saying. Young Master Feng San couldn't help but choke, his anger rising as he roared, Mo Xiaoyao, you're fucking looking for death, don't drag the entire Prince Ding mansion to die with you. You broke into the northern militants' camp alone, you, Prince Ding, have the best martial arts in the world, why don't you go kill Yeluyi, king of the northern militant, Lei Jinting, and Mo Jingli? Once they're all dead, the world will be at peace. Of course, in the end, don't forget to slit your own throat with a sword. At the end, young Master Feng San was so angry that he laughed, revealing a malicious and mocking smile at Mo Xiaoyao. Noisy. Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently. Feng Xiao was so angry that he picked up the things beside him and threw them at Mo Xiaoyao, then slammed the table and left, go die if you want, I'm not doing it anymore. Finished speaking, he angrily walked out. Fortunately, there were only the two brothers, Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi, in this tent. If the Mahist army's generals saw this, Feng Xiao wouldn't be able to escape the crime of offending his superior. Mo Xiaoyao frowned, then casually caught the things that Feng Xiao threw over. Stop, where are you going? I'm going to Spirit Vulture Mountain. If you dare to go find Li, I will break your legs. Mo Xiaoyao said darkly, alright, I know what happened today. It's just to teach Yeluyi a lesson, I won't come here again. You guys must be tired, go back and rest. Finished speaking, Prince Ding waved his hand, turned around, and left the tent, leaving behind the deeply hurt Feng Xiao, who sat there in a daze. After a long time, he finally reacted, Mo Xiaoyao. I saved your life, and you want to break my legs? What do you mean by sacrificing your life for the opposite sex? That's it. What do you mean by stabbing your brother twice for your wife? Just look at Prince Ding and you'll know. Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi looked at each other, then sympathetically patted Feng Xiao's shoulder and walked out. Whatever happened in the Mahist army's camp, under Prince Ding's strict and threatening orders, naturally, Yi Li wouldn't hear about it. Yi Li took Qin Feng and the others to Spirit Vulture Mountain's camp that night. Because Spirit Vulture Mountain wasn't the main battlefield, and it was supported by Feihong Pass. The Prince Ding mansion didn't have many soldiers, so naturally, they wouldn't deploy too many soldiers here. Only Zhang Qilan's deputy general, Zhou Min, led 50,000 Mahist army and 50,000 Dechu state soldiers to guard here. Yi Li and the others didn't give any advance notice when they arrived, so naturally, no one came out to greet them. But the situation outside the army made Yi Li frown. It was already late at night and the Mahist army, except for the patrolling soldiers, should have already gone to bed. But Yi Li and the others hadn't even gotten close to the camp when they heard the noise coming from inside. This wasn't the noise of something happening in the army, but the sound of soldiers drinking and fooling around. Yi Li's beautiful face suddenly darkened. Zhuo Jing and the others were originally from the Shadow Guard and had never been in the army. Qin Feng was originally from the Black Cloud Cavalry, and the Black Cloud Cavalry's discipline was stricter than the normal Mahist army. They had never seen such a situation, and their faces turned ugly. Yun Ting and Chen Yun were both from the army. Yun Ting coughed softly and said in a low voice, Wan Fei, this shouldn't be the Mahist army's soldiers, but the former Dechu state soldiers that we gathered after we recovered the lost land of Dechu state. Yun Ting had been in the Dechu state's army. Although Morongshan's military discipline was strict, there were always some who disobeyed. He had also heard of many cases where military discipline was loose. These Dechu state's soldiers had been utterly defeated by the northern tribes. If the Mahist army hadn't gathered them, they would have been no different from bandits. Yun Ting wasn't surprised that such a situation had occurred. Yi Li quickly understood the crux of the matter. This Lingjiu mountain camp was run by the Mahist army and the Dechu state's army respectively. The Dechu state's remaining soldiers couldn't compare to the Mahist army in terms of battle strength or other aspects. Perhaps some of them had given up. Zhou Min had just made a bet, and it wouldn't be easy for her to control them. Suppressing the anger in her heart, Yi Li said lightly, "Let's go in and take a look." Seeing the group appear at the gate, the guard who had been playing the finger-guessing game finally remembered his duty. He quickly stood up and asked sternly, "Who are you?" Yi Li asked in a low voice, "Where is General Zhou?" When the guard saw that there was a young and beautiful woman in the group, he couldn't help but look down on her. He waved his hand and said, "The military camp is an important place. How can a woman like you ask about it? Why aren't you leaving?" "Impudent." Qin Feng said in a low voice, "Princess Ding is getting married. Why aren't you letting General Zhou come out to receive her?" The guards couldn't help but be stunned. They sized up Yi Li and the others and couldn't help but laugh. "You said she is Princess Ding? A weak little girl dares to pretend to be Princess Ding. How bold! I think you are all spies from the northern tribes." It had to be said that although Princess Ding's fame was too great, there weren't many people who had seen Yi Li before. And Yi Li's appearance was too deceiving. Under the night sky, she really did look like a weak young lady from a wealthy family. "If she is Princess Ding, then wouldn't I be Prince Ding?" A guard smiled proudly. "Impudent." Qin Feng's expression suddenly changed. Before the guards could see clearly how he moved, the man who spoke just now was grabbed by him and fiercely thrown to the side of the gate. Immediately, a mouthful of blood spurted out. That person raised his head in shock. A bright sword was already at his throat. Qin Feng laughed coldly and said, "You have guts. Do you not want to live anymore?" The others were also shocked by this sudden turn of events. They immediately cried out in alarm. They even forgot about the signal and war drums when the enemy attacked. Yi Li and the others frowned when they saw this. Very quickly, the camp became even more lively. Many soldiers rushed over, but all of them looked like they were in a mess. When they saw that the people at the gate were not the enemy's soldiers, but a few outstanding-looking men and women, they were all stunned. They didn't know what to do. Until a drunk-looking general walked over, the guards guarding the door then hurriedly came forward to reporting to General, "These people are impersonating Ding Wanfei and want to barge into the camp." What? How dare? The general was about to fly into a rage when a black jade pendant was placed in front of him. Zhuojing said coldly, "Have you seen clearly?" The general's eyes widened. He looked at the black jade pendant in front of him and his legs went soft. "Ding! Princess Ding!" Yi Li stepped forward and looked at him indifferently and said, "Who are you? Do you understand? Where is General Zhou?" The general hurriedly said, This general is the Dechu State's Luo Zhou City commander, Sun Yawu. Zhou Min. General Zhou's camp is still about 10 li away from here. It turned out that ever since Zhou Min and Sun Yawu were ordered to be stationed here, the Mahist army and the Dechu State's remaining soldiers didn't get along well. These remaining soldiers were beaten up badly by the northern tribes and were almost useless on the battlefield. If it wasn't for the fact that they were worried that they would wander outside and harm the people, they would have already been stripped of their armor and returned to their fields. Zhou Min had just taken charge and didn't have enough prestige. The Mahist army's discipline was strict, but he couldn't control these remaining soldiers of the Dechu state. Helpless, Zhou Min didn't expect them to do anything. He only let them set up camp about 10 li away from the battlefield while he led 50,000 Mahist army soldiers to guard the front against the northern tribes. Because it was close to Feihong Pass and Feihong Pass was guarded by more than 200,000 soldiers of Yuan Pei, it wasn't very difficult. In such a situation, even Yi Li was very angry. If it wasn't for Yi Li's insistence on coming to Lingjiu Mountain, perhaps when the two armies fought in the future, this place would be the first place to have a problem. This general didn't know that Wang Fei was coming and didn't receive you. Please forgive me. Wang Fei, please go to the camp and rest for a while. This general will send someone to invite General Zhou over. Sun Yao didn't know how to fight, but he was very skilled in flattery. Yi Li was displeased. Just as she was about to refuse to leave and head to Zhou Min's barracks, the sound of a horse's hooves could be heard from afar. In less than a moment, a middle-aged man rode his horse over and stopped at the door. When he arrived in front of Yi Li, he lifted his robe and knelt on one knee. This general, Zhou Min, greets the princess. Chapter 860. Yi Li was not familiar with Zhou Min. She had only seen her a few times in Zhang Qilan's army and had been placed in important positions by Zhang Qilan. Zhang Qilan was an upright and fair person. Since he could promote Zhou Min to lead an army alone, it proved that there was no problem with his ability. Yi Li looked at the man in front of her who had a serious expression and was resolute and silent. She nodded and said, "General Zhou, you may dispense with the formalities." Sun Yao saw that Zhou Min had come so quickly and his expression was not good. The drunkenness on his face had completely disappeared and a shrewd light appeared in his small eyes. He looked at Zhou Min with a fake smile and said, "General Zhou, why have you come so quickly? General's camp is not far from where this general is." Zhou Min did not seem to hear Sun Yao's sarcasm and slightly frowned as she reported to Yi Li, "Wang Fei, it is already late. Will Wang Fei rest here for the night or go to the Mahist army's camp?" Yi Li had a better understanding of the relationship between the two armies. The remaining soldiers of Dechu state were naturally envious of the elites of the Mahist army and disliked them. The elites of the Mahist army naturally looked down on the remaining soldiers of Dechu state that had been beaten to a pulp by the northern tribes. Sun Yao naturally disobeyed Zhou Min's orders. Zhou Min also looked down on the remaining soldiers. "Aren't you unhappy? Yi doesn't need you. You can go wherever you want to be." Yi Li thought and said, "It's late. We won't disturb the rest of the generals. We'll just stay here for the night. If General Zhou doesn't have anything to do in the camp, you can also stay. Ben Fei has something to say tomorrow morning." Zhou Min hesitated but did not say anything. She nodded and said, "Yes, Wang Fei." Seeing Yi Li give such an order, Sun Yao's eyes had a trace of pride. Walking in front of Yi Li, he smiled and said, "Wang Fei, please." This general did not know that Wang Fei was coming. "There are no Yahuan in the camp to serve you. This subordinate will send someone to find 2 people to serve Wang Fei." Yi Li stopped, looked at Sun Yao indifferently and asked, "It's so late. Where does General Sun plan to find a maid?" Sun Yao said nonchalantly, "There are many villages near Spirit Vulture Mountain. Wouldn't it be easy to find a few girls? It is their good fortune to be able to serve Princess Consort. There's no need. When I'm away from home, this consort doesn't pay much attention. If General Sun has nothing else to do, you should rest early." After speaking, Yi Li ignored Sun Yao's expression and walked towards the camp. Sun Yao was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly went forward to lead the way for Yi Li. The next morning, when Yi Li stepped into the big tent in the middle of the camp, there were already quite a few people inside. Even the generals of the Mahist army that were 10 li away had arrived. The two sides were seated on different sides. Without looking at the color of their uniforms, it was possible to see who was Zhou Min's subordinate and who was Sun Yao's subordinate. Yi Li asked with a slight frown, "Where is General Sun?" Everyone looked at each other. Finally, a young general stood and said, "Wang Fei, General Sun hasn't woken up yet." Hearing this, the Mahist army all had disdainful expressions. A straightforward person couldn't help but mock, "It's almost noon and he hasn't woken up yet. General Sun really can sleep. No wonder." The other side also had discontent expressions. Someone couldn't help but complain, "There's no battle, why is he up so early?" Yi Li faintly lowered her eyes. A moment later, she raised her head and said in a deep voice, "Go invite General Sun to rise." 40 strokes of the cane. The big tent instantly became silent. The Maoist army had expressions that this was how it should be. Even Zhou Min's expression softened greatly. He also could not stand Sun Yawu's conduct, but his rank was not higher than Sun Yawu's. Also, the status of these Dechu state soldiers was special. Even if he could not stand it, he could only turn a blind eye. Wang Fei's actions naturally allowed them to vent their anger. A short while later, Sun Yawu was pulled out and pressed outside the tent to be beaten with the cane. What was surprising was that Sun Yawu looked like he was bullying the weak and flattering the strong. He did not even make a sound after being beaten with the cane. Yi Li's gaze slowly swept across the faces of Sun Yawu's subordinates. She was deep in thought. After the cane was finished, Sun Yawu was dragged in. With Lin Han personally supervising this punishment, he naturally wouldn't go easy on Sun Yawu. The back of Sun Yawu's shirt was a bloody mess. He was placed on the ground and just lay there. This general greets Wang Fei. Yi Li looked down at him and said lightly, "General Sun, do you submit to me beating you with the cane?" Sun Yawu stilled and said with a bitter smile, "Wang Fei has given this subordinate the cane. This subordinate naturally does not dare to refuse." Yi Li raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "You don't dare to refuse? Then you still refuse?" Sun Yawu quickly changed his words, I submit wholeheartedly." "Then tell me, why did this Fei hit you?" Yi Li asked. "This." Sun Yawu stilled. He said that he had woken up late, but he felt that it wasn't just for that. Actually, Sun Yawu already had an answer in his heart. He just did not dare to say it in front of Yi Li. Yi Li did not look at him and said lightly, "Do you think that this Fei hit you because General Zhou Min and the others have a problem with you? Or, is it because of what happened last night?" Sun Yawu's expression changed slightly. It was obvious that Yi Li had hit the nail on the head. Yi Li shook her head and said, "This Fei hit you because you woke up late today." Sun Yawu stilled. He did not believe that the reason was so simple. Naturally, he did not believe that Zhou Min would not make things difficult for him in front of Princess Ding. He heard Yi Li say, "General Zhou. If a general of the Maoist army is late for a meeting, what will happen?" Zhou Min looked down and said with a stern expression, reporting to Wang Fei, "For someone who is late without a valid reason, he will be beaten 40 times. Yi Li looked at Sun Yawu with a smile and asked, "General Sun, does waking up late count as a valid reason?" Sun Yawu said somewhat embarrassedly, "This general knows his mistake. This general accepts wholeheartedly." Yi Li nodded and ordered, "Help General Sun up." Zhuo Jing and Qin Feng helped Sun Yawu up on his left and right. They did not allow him to refuse and helped him to a chair at the side to sit down. Sun Yawu had just been beaten 40 times and was in so much pain that he broke out in a cold sweat. As soon as he touched the chair, he reflexively wanted to stand up, but Qin Feng casually pushed him back down. Knowing that Princess Ding wanted to sort him out now, Sun Yawu could only bitterly sit down. Looking at Sun Yawu with a smile that was not a smile, Yi Li looked at everyone and said lightly, "From today onwards, this Fei will be overseeing the Lingjiu mountain camp. General Zhou and General Sun will still be in charge of military affairs. This Fei will pretend that everything that happened before did not happen, but, if something that should not happen happens again." Lin Han, the Maoist army's military rules. Lin Han swept a glance over Sun Yawu's group and said expressionlessly, "Gathering a crowd to cause trouble, you will be beaten 100 times. During wartime, you will be beaten 50 times for drinking alcohol, 30 times for not working and resting on time, dereliction of duty, you will be beaten 100 times. Delaying military plans, you will be beheaded. Disobeying military orders, you will be beheaded." You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.